All right, good morning. It's 8:01, so I'd like to get rolling. I'm Tim Peters. I'm the state engineer for Pennsylvania for NRCS here in Pennsylvania, and really happy to have you all as part of our boot camp training. This is our boot camp basic ag conservation boot camp basic training, and it's a great training. We really look forward to doing this each year. It's a highlight to my year, and I hope that stands true to be the same for you as well. And the training really does give us a good awareness. It's a foundation of information and technical skills that are often used by ag conservation professionals within Pennsylvania. And you won't come out of this training being an expert in any one area, but you will know the basics. And you will, if you commit to the training, you will know where to find answers when questions come up, and you will have built your network stronger than what it was before. You'll have connected with people, instructors, and co-workers that can be a resource to you in the future. And the training really is a strong partnership. There's a lot that goes into it from multiple entities, and Pennsylvania has a unique and strong partnership when it comes to several groups coming together to promote conservation in Pennsylvania. Specifically for this training, the State Conservation Commission in Pennsylvania, the state agency, partners with NRCS to financially cover the cost. The training's free for those that attend, but there are costs associated with putting this on. And so the State Conservation Commission and NRCS cover those bills. The Penn State Extension staff, they have partnered really well with NRCS for Boot Camp Basic here, and we each share in the instruction time. So a lot of instruction time goes into this, a lot of time preparing for the training goes into it, and that's really shared between Penn State Extension and NRCS. And then a big keeps everything together, keeps things moving and organized is PACD. They work behind the scenes on all the logistics. So real thankful for PACD and specifically Shannon Winger that you'll meet in person when we get together on March 24th, the week of March 24th or the week of May, depending on which session you're in. But PACD is behind all the logistics. They handle the lunches. We wouldn't have those without them. The registrations, they manage the rooms, and just really keep everything moving and organized for us. So we are lucky to have with us to transition some people from the state, and I believe that Secretary Redding unfortunately had a conflict today, so we're gonna slide over and you'll get to talk with him for Boot Camp 2 if you return, which I hope you all do return. But Secretary Redding always helps us out with introductions there, so we're gonna move over. First off, to Doug Wolfgang. And Doug Wolfgang is the executive secretary for the State Conservation Commission. And Doug, you grew up on a farm in Schuylkill County, so right here in Pennsylvania. And I believe you graduated from Shippensburg University, so homegrown here. And you did work, started your career in the Lebanon County Conservation District as an ag conservation technician. I'd like to highlight that. So Doug's, at the top in Pennsylvania when it comes to leading ag conservation efforts, but did start as an ag technician, and then you worked for years with the Bureau of Farmland Preservation, which is really where you've had a lot of your career spent. And then finally, I guess it was January 2 years ago, you started as the executive secretary for the State Conservation Commission, and Doug's just doing a terrific job, and it's great to partner with. So it's been real fun to work with Doug. So Doug, I'm going to hand it over to you. If you want to have some opening words, that would be terrific.
Absolutely, and I believe Secretary Redding is attempting to log on, but has a wrong link. So maybe you could send him the link while I'm chatting here a little bit.
I'll
get some introductory remarks and sort of set the stage for the secretary. But Tim, it's a pleasure to be here always, and to all of you on this meeting. It really is one of the most important and special things we do throughout the years to have these boot camp trainings. As Tim mentioned, the word partnership is sort of the theme that comes to mind when we look at Pennsylvania and what we have here. But I thought of it last evening and came up with three principles, that make Pennsylvania's conservation landscape so unique and important. And I'll just share those with you real quickly for context. But land, practices, and people. On the land side, the number of farms we have here in Pennsylvania, close to 50,000 farms, 33,000 farms in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and of course a lot of emphasis on the Bay, but I would say about 2/3 of those are located in Pennsylvania. We have 4.4 million acres of prime farmland defined by NRCS as the best soils that are available for food and fiber. And we have a climate, of course, that supports growth of a variety of agricultural products on that soil because of the 42, 43 inches of rain that we can expect every year. We have 80,000 miles of creeks and streams. We have 655,000 acres of those acres of farmland are actually protected through permanent easement. Total economic impact of agriculture is about 137.5 billion. We're top 10 in commodities in dairy, livestock, poultry, direct marketing, organic. Very diverse types of agriculture here, from hemp to hops, mushrooms to maple syrup, and so many commodities in between. Pennsylvania is an agriculture powerhouse. Those farms are conventional. They're small diversified operations that do direct marketing. They're increasingly focusing on urban agriculture as well. So just makes Pennsylvania such a special and unique place. So land, number two, practices. Conservation districts have existed now for almost 80 years. We're in the 80th year anniversary of the State Conservation Commission. So installing practices, since the Dust Bowl era is nothing new. In fact, DEP reports that there are 156,000 practices roughly in Practice Keeper. That's an amazing history of Pennsylvania's conservation legacy, and certainly ACAP and EQIP over these past several years have really added and accelerated this. 5,000 practices so far in ACAP, with that dual benefit of helping to promote viable farms and clean water and a better environment. So the practices through ACAP many have been structural, and we've really relied on NRCS and the engineering side for that. So we again appreciate that partnership, but also a large number of agronomic practices. And of course, trends in farming and trends in agriculture will continue to shape the future of conservation, with a strong focus by this administration, Secretary Redding and the governor, on innovation. And certainly that will change how farming happens over time, and then that will dictate or drive decisions that we make on the landscape with regard to conservation as well. The regenerative agriculture movement, which is, of course, an intentional focus on soil health, biodiversity, climate resiliency on farms, and value-based supply chains. Another trend that we're seeing, where consumers are increasingly interested in knowing that farm is produced or their food is produced in a sustainable way. This will all help to influence the future of conservation and inform the types of practices that you work on and install throughout your career. So very exciting time. And then that third principle is just people, and that's where you all come in. This amazing conservation partnership with the pillars of NRCS, conservation districts, State Conservation Commission, DEP, technical service providers, watershed organizations, farm organizations. What we have here in Pennsylvania is something very unique and special. Just got a flair or a taste of that at a national convention I attended along with Denise and others from NRCS and the Commission and Conservation Districts last month in Salt Lake City. So really, again, emphasizing that the people here in this partnership is what makes it so special. And of course, farmers. We have in this first 2 years of ACAP, we have 1,900 farmers who sought some form of technical or financial assistance through the ACAP program. So to me, that speaks volumes. Just the interest is there in the farming community. Farmers are the best stewards of the land, and we try to tell that story every chance we get, and they want to do the right thing by conservation. And we're providing those opportunities because of this partnership and because of our recent funding. So, with that, again, just thank you all. It's such an exciting time. If many of you are just starting out your careers right now in conservation, just very excited to think about, what it will look like 10 years, 20 years from now, just given all these different factors I spoke of, and, just really wish you all the best in the training and in your future endeavors in conservation. So thank you. Back to you, Tim.
Hey, thanks a lot, Doug. I appreciate it. And I sent you an email if you wouldn't mind passing that on to Secretary Redding with the link, Doug, or if you could share that with him, that would be terrific.
In the meantime, down there now.
Okay, thanks a lot, Doug. Appreciate it. I'm gonna next hand things over to Denise Coleman for our next introduction. And Denise Coleman is the state conservationist for Pennsylvania NRCS. And she also started her career in the field. She started as a soil conservation technician in the Columbia, Montour, Wayne, and Lackawanna counties. Now, she spent time in various positions within NRCS out of the national office in Washington, D.C. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. And so she did start her, like I said, time in the field, and then she worked in Washington, D.C. She worked on projects such as the Farm Bill, getting Farm Bill programs up and running. She worked on easements, and then she also was instrumental in developing NRCS planning policy, which is in place today. So she has been serving as the PA State Conservationist for 15 years now, around 15 years, and she could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's been 15 years, and she is one of our senior, more experienced state cons across the state. So really provides leadership to Pennsylvania, but also across the country for NRCS. So we're real thankful to have her, and really supports these kinds of training. So Denise, with that, if you're on, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. It's good to see everyone this morning. Welcome to boot camp. Welcome to virtual boot camp. I'm excited for you all to be part of the learning session when you're outside. Want to thank Secretary Redding and Doug Wolfgang, who are our partners, and we couldn't do this without them, as well as Pennsylvania Association of Conservation Districts, Brenda Shambaugh and Shannon Weininger. So very much want to thank our partners today for also hosting you. Really excited. I like to be part of boot camp every year. I find that it's a fundamental thing that we do here in Pennsylvania that is not done by a lot of other states. Most states ship employees off to Nebraska, but Pennsylvania is not Nebraska, is it? So we try and train folks here at home so that you learn about Pennsylvania issues and Pennsylvania regulations, as well as Pennsylvania programs. So really happy to have you on today. I usually open up my talk, and I usually give a little bit of a quiz, and the quiz is, can anybody, first of all, in the chat, I'm going to spell something, and the word is trust. And the first thing that I usually ask people is, we're going to break this word apart. And I always say that if you get this word right, and you understand what this word is about, both in its meaning and also in its as an acronym, you'll have a long and healthy career with NRCS, with the conservation districts, and with state agencies. So the first two letters are TR. And can everybody join in the chat and give me an idea of what TR we would do within Pennsylvania? Any indication? So, if we're thinking about, Colin Cameron, you're smarty. Treat resources, that's correct. The first thing we do as conservationists is treat resources. And does anybody have the last three letters are UST? And does anybody know? And it shouldn't be from NRCS. Maybe they've heard this talk. Who is UST? What does that stand for? Anybody have an idea? Who do we generally service as customers? Who do we service as customers? I'm sorry, Rebecca, did you say something? Does anybody from NRCS want to give an indication what it might mean? Who's our customer out there when we're delivering services to agricultural producers and forestry landowners? Right? Usually I get somebody says the farmer. And in reality, the customer that we have is the US taxpayer, right? We're using federal or state or county funds, and those funds are to be used not only to treat the resources and help that agricultural producer address those resource concerns. Certainly we need to, as we work through the planning process, we want to, one, identify the problems out there, but then also identify the farmer or landowner's objectives and what they want to do to solve those problems. But in the end, we're out there working for the US taxpayer so that those resources are addressed. And I've had many jobs throughout my career, and I think that if you can keep those two concepts, treating the resources and who the customer is, the US taxpayer, you don't ever get in trouble with your job. You can do just about everything, and that's the bottom line. You can go up on the Hill to speak to congressional offices. You can go to the Office of Management and Budget. You can speak to the governor, and those two fundamental things will carry you throughout your career. And how do we do that? When we speak about the word trust, we do that by providing sound science and sound conservation planning and sound conservation technical implementation ideas. People are relying on us to give them those alternatives for their land. When I want a delivery sent to my house, I don't necessarily go out and ask my mechanic to deliver. I ask UPS or the United States Postal Service to deliver. When people call us out to their farms or their forests, they're asking us to be conservationists. And so as we become conservationists, the real thing is we treat those resources with sound science and sound technical specifications. And so you're going to learn a lot about that in Boot Camp 1. You're also going to learn a lot about that in Boot Camp 2. And I hope that you take that with you throughout your career. So again, glad to have you all here. When you do this and you use the trust, people will call you back and again and again and again because they know that you're a reliable conservationist that can help solve those problems. So once again, thank you all. Hope to see you in person at Boot Camp. Looking forward to the conversations, and you've got a great bunch of instructors. Big thanks to Tim Peters today and Dan Ludwig. They really carry the day when it comes to these boot camps. So thanks everybody, and have a great time.
Thanks a lot, Denise. We appreciate the message, and we do look forward to the training. So our third introduction, I'm excited to announce that we have Secretary Redding with us. And Secretary Redding, I apologize for the link issue this morning, but really thankful that you're on with us today. And Secretary Redding was nominated by Governor Shapiro as the Agricultural Secretary for Pennsylvania, the 27th Secretary for Agriculture for Pennsylvania in May of 2023. And Secretary Redding has spent more than 30 years serving Pennsylvania in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. He is a Penn State graduate like some of us and has his bachelor's in ag education and master's in ag and extension education. And he did start on a family farm, a dairy farm, and spent time as a dairy operator. And he continues to have a farm in Gettysburg. So Secretary Redding, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you very much for being on with us today.
Yeah, honored to do it, Tim. Thank you. And just want to express my appreciation to Denise and the whole NRCS team. Very much value the relationship that we have. I appreciate Denise's sort of trust, word and the meaning of that and how it's applied. And I'll just say that over those 30 years that you mentioned of my career, one of the real joys and highlights, and I think even professional accomplishment, has been that work in conservation, and particularly what I've seen happen with the policy making and the partnerships that have been formed, and the really substantive work, and ultimately the difference it's made on the landscape for both Pennsylvanians and certainly to the agricultural community has been significant. It continues to sort of, improve. That's what each of you in this journey of conservation are embarking upon. I just want to thank you for doing that and entering this really, really important phase. Conservation, as noted by Doug, has been, part of the work that we've done. But I think we're entering a period where that work is more important than it's ever been. And the issues that we confront here as a state and a nation are found in what we do, how we approach, what we sort of treasure in our communities, and that has been time and again underscored for me that the environment, the natural resources, is such a big part of that. So thank you for the partnership. Thank you each for being part of the conservation work. I have a personal piece of this as well, as noted by Tim. I have been around conservation all my life, and certainly on our home farm where I grew up, it was important. It became even more so when my wife and I purchased my in-laws' farm about 10 years ago. And I tell the story often that there are a couple of things that stand out. There are two pictures in the house. One is of sometime around 1955, when my in-laws sort of settled on the farm. And it's got this sort of aerial photo. And right at the time, it was a big deal to have an aerial photo of your farm. But you look at it, and it's outside of the buildings, recognizing buildings. You don't recognize the landscape. And then there's a photo sometime in the era of around 2020. And I look at it, and it's really a transformed landscape, and it's got the contours, it's got all of the, conservation work and buffers and a pond. And, I look at those two as really both the work of an individual, because ultimately it is about the person who owns that land and what they do with it. But it's also a story about all of the technical assistants and people who have been part of that conservation journey, right? My father-in-law would spend a lot of time with the Conservation District in Adams County and the NRCS team. I've been on the farm many times, helping us, advising us. I've got a farmer who we leased the farm to in part, and he's been extraordinary. He's done a lot of the work. But it's a reminder to me that ultimately this deep culture of stewardship that is alive and well in the agricultural community is something that we need to recognize, and to honor and celebrate that. But we also need to recognize that happens with a lot of really good people, right? And they come to this work out of conservation districts and nonprofit organizations and our state and federal governments, and particularly at a time when we're seeing a lot of conversation about the value of public investments and public people and the talents that are here and available to us to really transform communities and industries. We want to recognize and honor that work. So thank you all. Two is back in the summer, we received a report card from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Services, I think, or Sciences. And I share this just to say a couple of things. One, it reminded me the long journey of work that is involved in conservation, right? So that was the best report card we had for Pennsylvania in 19 years. And all of that investment that we've made over time of BNPs, right? It showed significant improvements in our local water quality and ultimately to Chesapeake Bay. And I use that report card sort of format as a reminder to me that we're all ultimately receive a report card, right? We get a report card of our work and whether we're, how we do that work and our competencies, areas for improvement and, areas of progress. And I think that was a reminder for me that over the course of nearly 20 years, we've made a difference. And there's a lot more to do, obviously, but in that report card, we get a chance to sort of look at how do we show improvement. That was a public and private investments in the nonprofit community. Certainly the water quality has made a difference. The progress that we've seen very specifically in nitrogen, right? That we have demonstrated more than 5 times the amount of progress in nitrogen reductions and 2.5 times the phosphorus reductions in 5 years than we saw in the previous 10. And those kind of pieces are important to you, I think, as you step into this role of conservation stewardship, conservation planning, that the work we're doing it's not this season, right? It's not this year even. It's over the course of time. And I think that's the really important reminder to all of us that the work that we do builds on the work that's been done, but also it's incremental and you keep making those improvements. You keep building that trust, as Denise notes. And we end up in a place where we see a really positive and changed environment and water quality. So thank you for taking on the task and thank you for being part of the partnership that's critical to that success, right? This didn't happen by individuals, but it happened on a farm, someone who owns the land, coupled with some really talented people who help plan and advise. And then stay at it, right? That's the other piece of my own farm. I see this has been a 50-year plus journey and we keep improving it. So what happens this year, we build on that next and so forth. So thank you for being part of that. I want to say thanks to State Conservation Commission and Doug, Denise and the SEC team and every conservation district and each of our partners in the public and private sector. I appreciate what you do. Thanks for giving me a little time this morning just to say hello to you and thank you. And look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Redding. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Denise. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support for the training. It's because of you that this all happens. And I just want to say, I think to you all, you'd be hard pressed to find a better career than working in ag conservation in Pennsylvania. We're promoting conservation, we're doing good work, and we're a community that supports each other to accomplish the common goals that we have. So it really is a great time to be in conservation. It's always a great time to be in conservation in Pennsylvania. So I introduced myself, Tim Peters, earlier. I also want to introduce Chris Canfield. Chris, I don't know if you want to say a word or two, but Chris is sharing moderator duties with me today. He'll be taking over as moderator here in just a little bit. So Chris, I don't know if you want to say hi.
Yeah, hi, good morning. You'll see me when we do the in-person in the end of March and in May, and I look forward to meeting you all, and we'll have a good time. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And we're going to slide into our first presentation, technical presentation, and that's going to come from Dan Ludwig. Dan Ludwig is the State Resource Conservationist for Pennsylvania NRCS. He's worked a career in conservation and has really been supporting the leadership in Pennsylvania for the past 4 or 5 years as the SRC. So Dan, with that, I'll hand it over to you to hear about some some laws and regulations that impact technical assistance, the federal law. Thanks, Dan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. As Tim said, I'm Dan Ludwig, the State Resource Conservationist. I've been with NRCS here for 21 years now. I started out as one of our regional grazing specialists in the Southeast area. So I've spent a lot of time, about 15 years in that position. So being on farm with producers and working through their goals and solving their resource concerns, mainly related to grazing. But I've also had some other roles through the years, working with producers on all aspects of their farm. So I spent 2 years as a resource conservationist in our Lebanon Tech Center. working with wetland compliance, which everybody really loves, and also our WRP, WRE program, so our wetland reserve and habitat restoration, mainly for our bog turtles. So as Tim said, I've been here as the SRC for almost 5 years now, and really enjoy teaching boot camp, getting to know all of you and sharing a lot of the information that we have. So hopefully this presentation is going to work and everybody's going to be able to see it. Hey, look at that. It's showing up quite well. So, as Tim said, my topic for this morning is federal laws and regulations. And the reason why we want to cover this is because regardless of whether you work for NRCS and are writing conservation plans, or you work for the district and you're writing Ag E&S plans, or you're a private consultant, or anybody that's writing a plan for a producer has to be aware of both the federal laws and regulations and state laws and regulations, which Brady is going to cover after me here this morning. But when we're doing our planning and providing technical assistance, we have to make sure that our technical assistance, whether it's doing a plan, implementing that practice, we're responsible for doing that correctly and not doing anything that will break a federal law or regulation. So some folks say, well, this only applies to NRCS. Not really. It really applies to everyone. And some of the emphasis is here that I'm going to talk about this morning is really focuses on whether you're an NRCS employee writing that NRCS plan, or if you're a district staff or a partner who's writing an what we call an NRCS conservation plan. So it's really good information to have, be aware of as you work through this, start writing your plans and implementing those plans for your producers and clients. So what are our objectives for this morning? Again, it's really to understand our compliance requirements when providing technical assistance. And then also understand the roles and responsibilities of NRCS or your staff or your organization and addressing compliance responsibilities. So when farmers are getting, whether it's financial assistance or technical assistance, again, as I mentioned earlier, there are those laws and regulations that need to be followed, and we can't be using dollars to break that. So again, that's what brings this kind of topic to the forefront this morning. So let's go back to a little bit of any civics classes that you may have had in your education growing up. So let's talk about laws and what's the difference between laws, regulations, and policies. So as you can see here, laws are written by the legislative branch and approved by the executive branch, and have basically established the authority for government actions. So laws are what brings the teeth to providing that guidance and really the orders that we have to follow. Regulations then are written by agencies. So USDA can write regulations, the SEC, PA Department of Agriculture. But, these are written by agencies and provide clarification to the public so they know how to implement or how that law is to be implemented. And then we have policies. And then policies are written by agencies and provide internal procedures necessarily to implement laws and regulations. So policies pretty much tell us how we are to implement the laws and regulations provided from the organizations above. So just like to go over that a little bit so you kind of know when we talk about, well, is it a policy, is it a regulation, or is it a law? So again, looking at NRCS policy, what is our policy when it comes to conservation planning, conservation technical assistance with implementation? Again, from our side of things, the NRCS side of the house, farmers working with us is strictly voluntary. There is no mandate that a producer has to work with us. And on the flip side, we have no ability to make a producer implement a plan. So again, everything working with us is voluntary. Districts and PDA, they have the ability to enforce. But again, our policy is really, helps us develop a plan so that those practices can be applied that are in compliance with those applicable laws and regulations. So there are some laws and regulations that are applicable to our agency. Again, because we're a federal agency, so we are bound to make sure that we follow certain laws and acts. So you can see some of the big ones that we are we focus on. One is the NEPA, so the National Environmental Policy Act. So that really is the overall scope of, making sure when we do our planning and implementation, we follow any federal laws. Another big one for us is the National Endangered Species Act, otherwise known as ESA. So again, when we're doing our conservation planning, we have to make sure that none of our actions result in take of a protected species. So for those of you that have been doing some planning, have some experience, we run the PNDI. So and that's our system that we can check how our conservation plan may affect any of the species governed by either U.S. Fish and Wildlife, PA Fish and Boat Commission, the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and the PA Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. So we run that. They tell us whether or not we have a hit, and we have to either get cleared because our actions have no result in take, or if our actions do have some impact, then we go through some consultation and find a way that we can avoid any impacts. One of our big things is the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. So you'll hear us talk about 1619. 1619 is part of the Farm Bill that tells us that we have to protect our customers' information. We can't share it openly. The only way we can share information is with written consent from those producers. So even though folks might want to have us share that information because we're all working together, but again, that's something that we have to abide by. And if a producer wants us to share information with another agency, then, as I said, they need to have that written authorization allowing us to share that information. And then there's a whole other slew of executive orders and related policy that we have to follow. So who is responsible for compliance? So we're talking a lot about this, I talk about NRCS, I talk about the conservation districts, but ultimately, who is responsible for compliance with these federal laws and regulations? Really, it's everyone. We all have that shared responsibility to be in compliance. So again, landowners or our clients are responsible for compliance. So a lot of times the farmers say, I'm trying to do the right thing. I need to do a stream crossing to keep the animals out of the stream. Well, there are regulations with Clean Water Act, a lot of the clean water laws that the DEP is responsible for. So even though we have that you might write that stream crossing in a plan, the farmer is still responsible for getting a permit when it's required, and that's part of compliance with those laws. One of the things is from the NRCS side of things, we really can't assume that responsibility for farmers obtaining the permits, rights, or approvals. For things that we do not have authority over. So one of the big things that we see a lot here in NRCS is when we run PNDIs. If we get a hit for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, say for a bog turtle, there we do have within regulation, we are allowed to look at those projects and look at if we feel that there's no impact there, we can issue a no effect determination because it's one federal agency taking responsibility over another federal agency. However, when it comes to our state agencies like DCNR, Fish and Boat Commission, and Game Commission, we have no ability to write a no effect determination if we have a hit for one of those agencies. So, again, NRCS, from that side of things, we have a little bit of ability to do that, but we can't overrule state laws, and we can't really assume responsibility for getting permits for producers. That ultimately comes down to the client. If they need a permit, they need to get that permit. However, we can assist them. We can give them whatever they need as far as designs, information to include in that permit application. And, and some of the things that, that you go to think about if your partner employees, such as district staff, you may have different responsibilities as well. So, but again, looking at the broad scope of things here today, all of us have a role in compliance with these federal laws and regulations. So one of the big questions that we get a lot is, do NRCS policies apply to partners? So if you're conservation district staff, yes. So one of the things that we do talk about is, when you're putting a practice in a conservation plan, or typically in an Ag E&S plan, we have the responsibility to make sure that those practices and those plans adhere to the standards and specifications that are found in the field office technical guide. That is kept up by NRCS. So all the practice standards are managed first at the national level, and then the states have the ability to review those and add stuff to them that is maybe site specific. Now, from the practice side of things, NRCS, we can make them stricter, we can add clarity to them, but we cannot reduce them in standing from how they come from the national office. So, I bring this up because, whether you're an NRCS employee or a district employee that's going to be writing plans on behalf of NRCS, because really all of you here today, we're hoping that you keep going in your journey to becoming an NRCS planner, especially a certified planner. So if you make that journey to obtain that designation, that means you're writing a plan on behalf of NRCS, and we have to make sure that we follow all the laws and regulations. So, and sometimes we have partners under agreement. So if you're under agreement with NRCS, then again, yes, you have to follow the policies set forth by NRCS. So, and I should have said in the beginning here, if anybody has any questions on anything that I cover, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. So, and I will address it. So again, what are your responsibilities as a planner? So one of the biggest things is, we have to recognize which practices are subject to the applicable laws or regulations. So again, if something has impacts to a stream or a wetland, you can be quite sure that there are laws and regulations that you need to abide by when planning and implementing those practices. we also have to provide our landowner or our clients with the necessary information to get those permits. So we're doing a disservice to our clients if we say, oh, you need to get a permit, you're on your own. We really don't want to be doing that. We want to be able to provide them with as much information as they need for that permit. Again, NRCS, typically we do not get involved in the actual permit application. Conservation District staff, you may provide that service if your district allows you to do that. But biggest thing is we want to make sure that we provide all the information that our clients need in order to get those permits. We also, as part of that conservation plan, is providing those maps, technical data, construction plans and specs, anything that we prepare in the planning process. We want to make sure that gets documented, and then what's applicable to go to the producer gets provided to them in their conservation plan, and then stuff that's required that we need to keep track of goes in that client file in your office. And then we also have a responsibility to provide any additional technical assistance. And so again, going back to a stream crossing example here is, we cannot provide technical assistance with them installing that crossing until they get that permit. So does that mean we can't do a survey and a design? No, because they're going to need that information. However, even though once they have that, the producer has that design, then they really can't break ground on that project until they have that permit in their hands. So even though producers may be wanting to get started on that in anticipation of that permit coming in the mail, but however, we have to pause our activities until that permit is obtained by that producer. Again, it's, we have to think about the liability that we take on if we do not follow these policies and steps. So how does NRCS and how do other partners comply with laws and regulations? So basically what we have here in NRCS is we use an environmental evaluation worksheet. For those of you who've been doing some planning, that's otherwise known as the CPA 52. So the CPA 52 is that document that allows us to show that we're staying in compliance with NEPA. So I mentioned that acronym earlier. So that EE worksheet actually does two things. So it allows us to be in NEPA compliance, and NEPA compliance is really the special environmental condition section within the CPA 52. So further down on that sheet, and that's all the federal and state laws and regulations. The upper portion, where it's broken down by resource concerns, otherwise known as SWAPA, that's our environmental evaluation to document the resource concerns that are found on the farm and how that conservation plan is going to help that producer solve those resource concerns. So the 52 is an overall environmental evaluation, but the lower portion, the special environmental concerns, is what allows us to be in compliance with NEPA. So it's if you haven't seen the CPA 52 yet, it's quite an extensive list of laws and regulations. So you can see here it's anywhere from the Clean Air and Water Act, our planning. Some of these do not apply, so we can write that it's not applicable. So it's definitely a management area, but depends on where you're at in Pennsylvania. Believe it or not, there are parts of Bucks in Philadelphia that fall under that. Coral reefs, obviously, that's one that we that are not applicable in Pennsylvania. Cultural resources, that's a big one. I think we all have a responsibility in making sure that we're following the state and national historic preservation acts. So we have to make sure that our actions aren't having negative impacts on cultural resources. Again, I mentioned the T&E species, so the PNDI. We are looking at environmental justice, but that given the climate that we're in now, that may be changing. We also have to look at environmental fish habitat. A lot of times we feel that that's not applicable in Pennsylvania, but we actually, if you go to the NOAA website, we do have some areas mapped in Pennsylvania that are part of that essential fish habitat. We also look at flood, our practices and their impacts on floodplains, invasive species, that is, there are state regulations about that. And then again, finishing out the list, migratory birds, the Bald and Golden Eagle Act, prime farmland, riparian areas, wetlands, and wild and scenic rivers. So again, there's all things that we have to consider when we're writing that conservation plan. So again, we're trying to do good things for the farmers. We're trying to solve those resource concerns. But again, there's definitely those national and federal laws that we have to abide by and make sure that we don't have a negative impact and break any of those laws. So I mentioned earlier about the so we have the Freedom of Information Act and our Privacy Act. So again, FOIA, as most people know it is generally provides that any person has a right to have access to those agency records, except for portions that are protected. So, and we have seen this in the past where either environmental groups or other folks will submit a FOIA request, and there are certain things that can be released, but a lot of information, it falls under that exemption or exclusion. So but again, we take handling our customers' information, the privacy of their information, very seriously. So again, knowing how we have to comply with FOIA and the Privacy Act. So the Privacy Act of 1974 essentially was enacted so that federal agencies don't openly share customers' information with people that don't have permission to have access to that. So again, that's why, as part of, as I mentioned earlier, 1619, if a partner agency or somebody needs information in regards to a conservation plan, we have to get that written consent from the producer to release that information. Good segue to, as I mentioned, Section 1619 is part of the 2008 Farm Bill. And essentially what that is saying is we will not disclose information provided. Again, sorry, brain fart here. So again, so basically it's saying we're not going to disclose information, and there is a broad spectrum of information. So, folks think, oh, well, just a conservation plan map. That is actually protected information because it has geospatial information. As soon as we put a tract boundary, any specific practice on a map, that is geospatial information. So again, it's pretty serious. We take that pretty serious in how we protect that information. So again, even if we have to do consultation with a state agency, we need that producer. So if we need to do consultation to clear a PNDI hit, we do have to get written permission from the producer if we need to release a map or conservation plan or anything that has geospatial information to an agency. So again, we bring this up because again, we're trying to get our plans written for our producers, help them implement the plan. But other state organizations have how FOIA requests work. Again, as I mentioned, federally, a lot of stuff is still protected, falls in that exemption. But some of our other agencies and partner agencies, it's not as protected, and groups can get a lot of information through FOIA requests. So again, that's why I can't stress enough, we take protecting our clients' information very seriously. So I think I've covered this quite well. So again, we're all trying to do the right thing. We're trying to get conservation on the ground, develop plans for our producers. So again, even when we're sharing information between our partners, we have to have that release of records. And NRCS, we have a form that we can send to the producer, have them review it, and a lot of times we ask them to specify what, do they want all the information released? Can we release all the information? Are there only certain things within the conservation plan we should release? And also, how long? Is it indefinite? Or, if a producer says, well, I only want you to be able to share, maps with Fish and Boat Commission for 6 months, they can specify that. And then, we have to abide by that. But again, for us to share information from the federal side of things, we do need that written consent from the producer. So with that, again, that's kind of from the top level bird's eye view of that. We could, if you really wanted to take a nap this morning, I could go deep into every single federal law and regulation and how that affects things. But no, we want you to stay awake for the rest of the morning. So with that, are there any questions?
No questions in the chat, Dan. If anyone thinks of anything, we can certainly get that question back to Dan later. And we appreciate the talk. We dive right in with presentations talking about law. Maybe now would be a good time for a joke. My predecessor really prided himself on telling bad jokes, so I've kind of taken that up myself. And so I do have one for you today. And my joke is, where does a pig go to get a new tail? And the punchline is they go to a retail store, which I think is pretty funny. So if you like that, I'll have more of that throughout the week. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Now is probably a good time to hand things over to Chris. Chris, do you mind taking over moderator for the rest of the day? Thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome. That was awful.
I've got a lot more.
All right. Next up, we have laws and regulations that impact technical assistance with Brady Seeley and Nathan Radabaugh. If you guys are ready, take it away.
Yep. Hey, good morning. Let me get this PowerPoint going here. Okay, are you seeing just the PowerPoint now?
Yep, you're all set.
Okay, good. All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Radabaugh. I'm a water program specialist with DEP in our agriculture compliance section. Also for this presentation, I'll be joined by Brady Seeley, who is the SCC's director for the nutrient management and odor management programs. But yeah, let's get into it. We're going to talk about, state environmental regulations and agriculture resource management. We just heard about federal, so let's talk about some of the state stuff. Okay. All right. So as we've been talking about, we're talking about conservation partnership. So we're talking about state and federal agencies that have a common goal. And, those goals can, mainly consist of assisting agricultural landowners and operators with developing and implementing, those resource plans. So we're going to be talking about, manure management plans, ag ENS plans, and conservation plans with NRCS. But they're working to, help the landowners and operators meet compliance with the state and federal regulations, and to meet the requirements for the other resource management programs that are out there. And then down here we just see a couple of the agencies that are involved with this. We got the SCC, PACD, NRCS, Penn State Extension, and Department of Agriculture and DEP as well. So let's take a look at some of the different conservation partnership roles for these different agencies. So first, NRCS. NRCS is here to, provide technical assistance for plan development and implementation, and also to guide the producer to the other partners and organizations that are involved with that. We also got the Conservation District here to, assist producers to meet those regulatory and program obligations and requirements. Refer producers to the appropriate technical provider when it's needed, and assist in the application process for permits and financial assistance. We got DEP, of course, we're here doing the program development, guidance, permit reviews, and enforcement and compliance. And then also we got the SCC, Department of Agriculture, and PSU Extension involved with, program development, policy and guidance, education, and support for the programs. So let's talk about numbers here. These numbers are close. They might be a little low here. They update these every couple of years, but looking at all the agricultural operations in Pennsylvania. So animal operations are any of these operations that are going to be land applying manure or ag processed wastewater. Those are going to be that stuff is regulated by DEP with the Manure Management Manual. And then, of course, by that, we need to have a manure management plan. So that's for all animal operations, regardless of size. But then also, now you've got concentrated animal operations, which make up just a small portion of the animal operations in Pennsylvania. But those are going to be, those are high density farms with greater than 2,000 pounds per acre of animal density, or we use the term AEUs. We'll get into that later, but that's, 2.0 or greater per acre. So that's going to be regulated by the State Conservation Commission through the Act 38 program. And that requires an approved nutrient management plan that has to be prepared by a certified planner. And then you've got what we call CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. So those, to be a CAFO, that's going to be based on the animal density or the quantity of animals, livestock you have on your farm. So that we're talking about, if you have a farm with greater than 1,000 AEUs, which an AEU is 1,000 pounds of livestock weight. So if you have greater than 1,000 AEUs, or you're a concentrated animal operation with greater than 300 AEUs, or you trigger the requirement based on the EPA's animal numbers, which we'll talk about later, that makes you a concentrated animal feeding operation. DEP manages those operations as delegated from the EPA. But CAFOs are going to need a nutrient management plan. They're also going to be required to have an NPDES CAFO permit from DEP. They're going to need a certified planner, and there's public access to that. So looking at all the things we're going to cover here, here's our long list. We're going to start briefly with some Federal Clean Water Act. We're going to talk about a bunch of the chapters of the PA Clean Streams Law that affect agriculture operations. We're going to get into the Act 38 program, and we're also going to be talking about, PA's invasive species laws, some local ordinances, and the right to farm law and the right to know law and how they affect operations in Pennsylvania. All right. So getting into it here, first one, let's talk about the Clean Water Act here. So the Federal Clean Water Act, of course, enacted in 1972. And kind of a lot of the stuff we do today is as a result of this. So 1972, they restructured and expanded the Federal Water Pollution Control Act that was originally enacted in 1948. The Clean Water Act established for regulating discharges of pollutants into the waters of the United States and regulating water quality standards for the surface waters. And through this act also created the NPDES permit program, which we will be talking about a little bit, because that's going to be why we have CAFO permits. All right. So Pennsylvania's Clean Streams Law is the backbone for a lot of our environmental regulations that we have here in Pennsylvania. So this was originally enacted back in 1937 with the purpose of regulating the discharge of of any pollutants to the waters of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it also established the basic authority to protect streams from pollution for the benefit of Pennsylvania, its citizens, and the environment. And, the term in the Clean Streams Law, the term pollutant was just that, pollutant. So that enables us to regulate things such as manure, sediment, things that may not have been specifically spelled out, but because the way the law was written, it allows us to regulate that. And then also Clean Streams Law is also responsible for the Act 38 regulations that we're going to hear about a little later. All right, so let's get into Chapter 102. So Chapter 102 is going to be related to erosion and sediment control. 102.4b is going to be related to construction activities. 102.4a is going to be related to agricultural erosion and sediment control, or Ag-E&S. So what does that mean? So any operation with plowable or tillable land, that also includes no-till operations, or animal heavy use areas are regulated under 102.4a. So, animal heavy use areas, we're talking about barn lots, feed lots, loafing areas, essentially anywhere that can't maintain vegetation over the soil. You may also hear them called animal concentration areas, but that term does not include anything entrances, pathways, and animal walkways between housing areas for animals. So if you've got plowable, tillable land or animal heavy use areas, if you've got less than 5,000 square feet of that space, you're required to implement BMPs to minimize erosion and sedimentation and prevent pollution to waterways. But if you've got 5,000 square feet or greater of plowable land or animal heavy use areas, you need to have an agricultural erosion and sediment control plan and implement BMPs to minimize erosion or sedimentation. So what needs to be in an Ag-E&S plan? So first thing is, you need to address sheet and rill erosion, which that's going to be looking at using, the Russell equations, the soil loss, to ensure that you are not eroding more soil than should be allowed. Any concentrated flow areas should be identified, and when necessary, BMPs should be implemented to address those areas. And the Ag-E&S plan needs to also identify those animal heavy use areas, animal concentration areas, and implement BMPs for those areas as well. The NRCS conservation plan may be used to meet the requirements of an Ag-E&S plan. I think these days, they all are pretty much matching what needs to be. There was a time when the conservation plan didn't have everything for an Ag-E&S plan requires, but these days everything has been good that I've been seeing. And some resources for you here to learn more. So this first link here is for DEP's 102 construction website. The second link is the Ag-E&S website. Pretty much all the DEP links I may mention here can also easily be found by just searching for like DEP 102 permits or DEP Ag-E&S plans. It'll take you right to the website with the first result. And then some more resources for you here if you really want to get into it. We have a Clean Water Academy course on Ag-E&S plans. And this is kind of divided up in three different, essentially, formats here. There's one that's aimed at plan writers, one that's aimed for the farmer, but you can do any of these. And this is a really good resource to get yourself kind of up to speed on what's supposed to be in an Ag-E&S plan. All right, next we'll talk about 105. All right, so Chapter 105 of the Clean Streams Law is where we get our water obstructions and encroachments. The purpose of this is to regulate, to prevent the unreasonable interference with water flow from in-stream construction activities. The Chapter 105 also, is to assure proper planning, design, construction, maintenance, and monitor of water obstructions and encroachments. Pretty much any water encroachment activity or construction is going to require a permit. We have, what's called a GP, which is a general permit, which pretty much means, everyone getting that permit is doing the same scope of activity. It's essentially like a template that makes it easier. Depending on the size of your project and maybe possibly where it's located, there may be federal regulations that apply. So make sure you look into those ahead of time. Okay. So yeah, getting into GPs, those general permits are the DEP approved permits where you essentially register to utilize the permit. It's typically for small projects, stuff like we talked about, like stream crossings for livestock are going to probably fall into these. The use of the GP may be waived in certain circumstances. But if you want to find out more on that, I do recommend you just go to DEP's 105 website and look more into that with more specifics on the type of projects that can get a waiver. So things to consider if you are planning and need a 105 permit. Producer should have an Ag E&S plan or a conservation plan. The plan needs to identify the location of the projects and the BM. What exactly is the BMP being installed here? Discuss with your operator. Is the project going to result in the obstruction or encroachment on a waterway or wetland? And that way you can figure out, hey, yep, we need a permit. Let's make sure we get that done. And then on the right side here, just a couple of the common GP permits that we have ready to go. Fish habitat structures, bank rehabilitation, agricultural crossings and ramps there, GP6, temporary road crossings. And then here's just a list of some common BMPs that you might see on agricultural operations that do require GP permits. So stream crossings, underground outlets, grass waterways, lined waterways, subsurface drains, stream bank protection, and pipelines. And some of those, depending on, mainly you need like grassed waterway or underground outlet, to or near a water body. So if you're doing it and it's nowhere near a body of water that you need to worry about, then you probably don't need a permit. But if it's anywhere close to one, just to be safe, make sure you look into that. And just a little bit of information on registering for GP general permits. There is a packet for each individual each general permit. And you can go to DEP's Greenport website or the Chapter 105 website, and they've done a really good job of putting all the documents for each one together, so you can just go in there and find everything you need. It is important to know that if your project does require a permit, you need that permit in hand before you begin any construction. So that's just something to remind people of if they are, you do realize they need a permit for their project. And there are some joint permits in the obstructions and encroachments category. These are permits that are going to be reviewed by DEP and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Typically, these are, like it says here, small projects with insignificant impacts. If you're not going to be affecting wetlands, you're not going to be increasing flood heights or patterns, those types of things. Some examples of things that are joint permit applications are going to be streamside retaining walls, removal of flood debris, or the repair, reconstruction, or replacement of existing water obstructions. It's not a lot that falls into this category, but I recommend just take a chance and read the website information there. It'll kind of cover everything a little better than we can in this time. Okay, so good stuff here. Chapter 91, manure management. So Chapter 91 of the Clean Streams Law here, 9136A is going to be related to animal manure storage facilities. There's going to be information that regulates the design and construction criteria for manure storages. Important to note that any liquid or semi-solid manure storage constructed after January 29th, 2000 must have been designed and certified by a registered professional engineer. If it wasn't, and we come out for an inspection or any reason, we're going to ask you to get it certified. And this also, Chapter 9136A also includes the manure storage freeboard requirements. And then Chapter 9136B regulates the land application of animal manure and ag process wastewater. This is where our manure management plan requirements come from. But any operation that land applies animal manure or ag processed wastewater must have a written manure management plan, and they must implement it and be operating in accordance with it. Concentrated in Chapter 9136B also gives us our CAOs for Act 38. And then CAFOs are going to be under 92.5A, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so manure management plan. So a manure management plan under Chapter 91, it must be a written plan. A simple manure management plan can be developed by the farmer or essentially anyone. There's no certification process involved. The manure management manual does set a standard format that should be adhered to unless alternatives are approved. Let's see here. So manure management plans, after you develop your manure management plan as the farmer, you do not need to submit it to DEP unless it is requested during an inspection. But as a farmer, you should have your manure management plan available at all times. So the manure management plan is not just the application rates for where and how much manure is going to be applied. It also regulates and looks at the setbacks from environmentally sensitive areas. It has specific portions there about any winter manure application. It looks at your manure storage and your stacking areas and how you manage them. It's going to look at pasture management on the operation, and it's also going to look at how are the animal concentration areas managed on that operation. There are record keeping requirements for the manure management plans. Some of the records that a farm should be keeping, there's going to be manure application records, where and when. If you have a manure storage, you should be at least monthly looking at that and making sure you still have the space that you need. If you are transferring or exporting manure as well. And then we also require them to keep crop yield records. And then new for last year, we published some revisions to the manure management manual. So we created this new manure management plan workbook and short form course that can be found on our Clean Water Academy. That course can be accessed by anyone at any time with no need to create an account if you don't have one. But if you're working with manure management plans, this is your one-stop shop now. We've got a couple learning activities here to kind of get you up to speed with what's in a manure management plan. But it's also going to be the best place to find any of the documents that you would need to download. We've got all the templates and appendices on here. We've also got links to resources such as mapping if you need them. But yeah, this is the place to go if you need anything related to manure management. Okay. And then this flow sheet, which may be hard to see depending on how big your screen is available also on the Penn State Extension Nutrient Management website. But this is a flow sheet that just talks about how do you determine what type of plan does your operation need. So starting at the top, does your farm have 700 cows, more than 2,500 hogs, 500 horses, 125,000 broiler chickens? If you do, then you're going to need a CAFO permit and a nutrient management plan. Then it goes down here, a US CAO with greater than 2,000 pounds of animals per acre. Yes, then you need a nutrient management plan. And then if you have livestock, you're applying manure, but you don't meet those other ones, then you just need a manure management plan. All right. So Chapter 92, we're looking at those concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFOs. CAFOs, they're regulated by DEP, and we are delegated that from EPA. CAFOs are required to have a NPDES permit that is issued and overseen by DEP. Those permits do have, there's additional requirements for your manure storages, and they also have additional requirements for record keeping and reporting. CAFO is required to have an Act 38 nutrient management plan. They're required to have an Ag E&S plan. Because this is a department action issuing permits, there is requires to have a requirement to have public notification. Usually once every 5 years, a CAFO is going to be inspected by a DEP inspector. And then each year, annually, the nutrient management plan status review is going to be conducted at the CAFO by either a delegated conservation district or by an SCC staff member. And then again, just another flow chart to help determine if your operation is a CAFO. And you can kind of see a little bit of there, that top hexagon there. All the different kind of thresholds that if you exceed, you are a CAFO. We talked about, 700 cows, 1,000 beef cattle, 2,500 swine, 10,000 sheep, 55,000 turkeys. So yeah, if the operation is exceeding any of those animal thresholds, then they're a CAFO. Also, if you have over 1,000 AEUs, you are also a CAFO. Or if you're a concentrated animal operation with greater than 300 AEUs, you also meet the definition of a CAFO and are required to have a permit and all those required plans. Again, this image is also on the Penn State Extension website if you want to go find it and save it. We also have DEP has a CAFO website with more information about permitting. So under that same area there, Chapter 92A, we also have water quality management permits. These permits are going to be required for any new or expanded liquid or semi-solid manure storages. And it's required if you have greater than 1,000 AEUs, you fall into this category. Or if that liquid or semi-solid manure storage is between 1 million gallons and 2.5 million gallons in a special protection watershed or in an impaired watershed, then you will need a water quality management permit. And these permits also apply to all liquid or semi-solid manure storages of 2.5 million gallons or more. The design and construction of the manure storages need to be done by a registered engineer that meets in the design needs to meet PA Tech Guide standards. And let's see here. So individual versus general NPDES CAFO permits. So there's two types, either an individual or a general. Individual permits are going to be specific to, usually a CAFO that's in a special protection watershed. There are circumstances where if there are significant compliance history of that CAFO, they could be asked to get an individual permit as well, usually because that's to implement specific criteria into their permit. But yeah, so any existing or new CAFO that is not in a special protection watershed is typically going to have a general NPDES permit. Those permits are essentially, a template. Every general permit essentially says the same thing. And then once again, another flow chart here that can be used to kind of help with water quality management permits here. And then let's see here. So last but not least for me is going to be Chapter 275 biosolids. So this chapter regulates the land application of sewage sludge, also known as biosolids. So that, biosolids are monitored and enforced by DEP. You do need a permit to apply biosolids, and they should be applied at an agronomic rate, meaning, what you're applying is to meet the nutrient needs of a crop. And, there are specific setbacks for application and other practices related to biosolids. For more information, please go to DEP's biosolids website, because that's going to be the best source of information. And then next, I will hand it over to Brady Seeley.
All right. Thank you, Nate. I'm assuming you're going to keep controlling the slides for me?
Yep, I can do that. Let me just...
I appreciate that. So real quick, just a little bit about me. I'm again Brady Seeley. I'm with the State Conservation Commission. I'm the director of the Nutrient Management, Odor Management, and Manure Hauler Broker programs. Just a brief background of myself. So I grew up on a small dairy farm in Canton, PA. That's located in Bradford County. Went to college for environmental resource management. Got my bachelor's in that with a minor in chemistry. And then after graduating, I got hired by the Cumberland County Conservation District to be the Chesapeake Bay technician. Worked at the district for 5 years. and then got hired by the State Conservation Commission. And I've been here for a little over 5 years now. Started out as a Conservation Program Specialist 1, promoted to the Regional Coordinator Supervisor about 3 years in. And then after my predecessor, Frank Schneider, went to the Bureau of Plant Industry, I was then promoted to director of these programs about a little bit over a year ago now. So a little bit of background on me for you all. So we're going to talk about Act 38, 2005, and I was reviewing my slides this morning again, and I never really looked at this picture too well on the screen, but then after kind of looking at it more closely, like I'm thinking, wow, that is an old picture. I really should update that. That if anybody's familiar with the inside of poultry barns, you don't really see them set up like that anymore. I mean, there still be some that are set up like this, but you can see there in the middle, you got those box fans hanging there. That's the old way of creating a tunnel fan system in a barn. Now most tunnel fans are on the end or are grouped on an end or on the side of barns to create that tunnel effect. And then you can also see additionally hanging there off the ceiling there, those kind of flat looking almost upside down plate looking things. Those are pancake heaters, and you don't see them much anymore in barns either. They're still both, that system's still used, but it's used in much older barns. So I feel like I should probably get an updated picture there, but I digress a little bit. So Nate, go ahead and take me to the next screen. So I'll apologize in advance to everybody who is attending our nutrient management orientation class tomorrow as part of our certification training program. A lot of this information you're going to hear from me today, as well as some of the other information you've heard from some of the other folks here, will be a little bit of a repeat tomorrow at our orientation training, but we definitely go into a lot more detail regarding the Act 38 Nutrient Management Program, where today is just a bit of a brief overview. So the objective of the nutrient management program in Pennsylvania is number one, preserving water quality. That's the main objective here for the nutrient management program. And through this, it creates nutrient management planning standards for certain agricultural operations. Nate kind of already went over that criteria. It is for CAOs and CAFOs, although we do have a volunteer program as well for anybody who wants to volunteer to have an Act 38 nutrient management plan. So the law requires the development of nutrient management of the nutrient management plan or nutrient balance sheets. Nutrient balance sheets are an important component of the nutrient management plan for the export of manure. This program is administered by the State Conservation Commission, and we do delegate this program to conservation districts for the administration and implementation, so review of plans, approval of plans. Not all conservation districts are delegated. I believe we have 51 delegated, 51 or 52. I always forget what the number is. So not all of them are delegated, but the vast majority are. And this delegation agreement is combined nutrient management and manure management. Let's go ahead, Nate. So kind of going into what the nutrient management plan is, specifically just again, high level, it IDs the nutrient sources on the farm, so what the animal types are, as well as any other sort of maybe importing of manure, milk house wastewater, egg wash water. Those are all nutrient sources on the farm. Determines the application rates and manure application restrictions. So is determined. So we look at, is the limiting factor nitrogen or is the limiting factor phosphorus? That'll determine our application rates. And any application restrictions would be setbacks from streams, wells, lakes, any surface water. Then we also look at the handling of the excess manure. So if the operation produces more manure than they have ground available, which is kind of the whole point of a nutrient management plan, it needs to have in there where that excess manure is going to, whether it's a known landowner or it's going through a broker, and that's where our nutrient balance sheets come into play. Also identify any other BMPs necessary. to address resource concerns. So, a heavy use area protection, a manure storage, grass waterway. That's the purpose of that section. And then the nutrient management plan, it should be consistent with the conservation plan or Ag E&S plan. We utilize the soil loss calculations in those plans for our nutrient management plan, as well as we want to make sure BMPs being identified to be implemented are consistent. And then our nutrient balance sheets, we kind of call it a simplified nutrient management plan. It really takes it down to a much more simplified version, where we're looking at, instead of field by field, we're looking at more of a crop grouping. Again, this will determine the manure application rates on the importing farms for any nutrient management plan operation that has excess of manure. It will be exported to an importing farm. And then again, the application rates focus on crop nutrient needs, with a limiting factor being nitrogen or potentially phosphorus if there's a high level of phosphorus or winter spreading or items like that. Go ahead, Nate. All right, here we have a few links that we have. So the SCC program websites listed there are kind of our home base for the nutrient management program. However, is housed on Penn State's website. So if you Google PA nutrient management program, that Penn State link will be the first one that comes up. That's where we have a ton of information. That's where we keep our planning templates, our tech manual, admin manual, everything you really could possibly need will be on that website. We also have a couple links there that goes to more detail explaining the Act 38 nutrient management program. Go ahead, Nate. So an additional side of the Act 38 law is the odor management program. So the objective of this program is to address the potential for impacts from off-site migration of odors from animal housing and manure storage facilities. So odors from field application is not addressed in this program. And obviously the bulk of the complaints that you may receive, especially here in the spring and fall, when a lot of farmers are going out and applying manure, is odor, and odor from the actual field application manure. So just note, though, that the odor management program does not regulate field application. It establishes planning and implementation criteria for the odor management plans, and then it is the actual plan itself is a site-specific plan that will address and look at potential odor impacts from neighboring facilities near to that operation. So any sort of housing, public facilities, that's what we look at. And we have an odor site index that calculates that and will produce a value that will then determine to what level BMPs must be implemented to manage the impacts of that odor. One thing to note, that these operations, they are not required to completely eliminate odors. That is not the purpose of this program. We understand that agricultural operations produce odor. That is just a known fact, but we want to make sure that these odors are not adversely affecting any neighboring facilities, and that the operator should implement BMPs to help mitigate that. So go ahead to the next slide, Nate. So who is required to get an odor management plan? That would be any agriculture operations that are defined as a CAO and or a CAFO. Again, we can have some volunteers in this program as well. And then this only applies to new animal housing or manure storage facilities. So if Act 38 dairy operations building a new manure storage facility, then they would need to have an odor management plan if they did not have one already prior to the construction of that facility. Or it's also for a newly constructed portion of an expanded facility. So again, if that same dairy farm is also adding on to their freestall, they would need an odor management plan for that portion of the freestall. So that goes to the next bullet there. Existing facilities are not affected by the odor management plan. So anything that was there prior to the expansion would be considered existing. And then again, manure applications not affected. The plans are reviewed and approved by the State Conservation Commission. This should be done prior to construction. We do not currently delegate this program to any conservation districts. All review and approval is done by commission staff. And then plan implementation is required prior to use of facility. So we want to make sure that everything is in place when it comes to any sort of equipment, that the waterers, the feed lines, it's all working properly prior to the use of the facility. The purpose of that being that any water leaking onto manure or litter can help to generate more odor. Same thing with feed. So a lot of the basic level BMPs and odor management plans are just good housekeeping, common sense practices. And again, the odor management plan and nutrient management plan ideally should be developed and implemented or at the same time to coordinate the maximum benefit to the ag operation. Go ahead, Nate. Again, here are some links for our odor management program, and the main contact for the odor management program is Carl Diamond. You can go to next slide. So we're going to talk about some other related ag regulatory programs, kind of leaving the manure world here. So we'll talk about some of the invasive species, local ordinances, right to farm, and right to know. So next slide. All right. So I'm not an expert in the invasive species material, so I'm going to do my best to go through this. But still wanted to highlight that these are programs you may run into in your day-to-day work. So what's an invasive species? It's a non-native or exotic species that is not indigenous to our PA ecosystem, whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm. So that's a basic definition of what we're looking at when it comes to invasive species. There are a variety of national and state invasive species council. We have our own council here for invasive species, and we're charged with development of invasive species management plans, which look at detection, identification, control, and these would encompass aquatic and terrestrial invasive species. And there is a couple links for the National Invasive Species Council, and then a link for our governor's Invasive Species Council in PA. Next slide. Continuing some invasive species, we do have a PA noxious weed control law. There is a link there for that. The regulatory authority is the PA Department of Agriculture. And one key component of this weed control law is it is illegal to propagate, sell, or transport noxious weeds ID'd on the noxious weed control list. As you can see there on the right side of the slide, that we have some invasive species there listed. I don't believe that's all of them. I don't know how many is on the list, but you can see there's a link there to look up a comprehensive list of all the invasive plants. Next slide. So some contacts, if you need, you can provide these to anybody who's looking for some resources, or even you yourself. For ID and control recommendations for most noxious weeds, you can look at your Penn State County Cooperative Extension offices. And for ID and ratification of special noxious weed infestations, please contact the Bureau of Plant Industry. Next slide. And then here's some more information for some invasive species. A link here. Again, I think that for these in our website there, that'll take you to a list of a lot of the invasive plant species and some other general information from the national level. Next slide. So here we're going to kind of talk about some local ordinances in relating to nutrient odor management. So a municipal water quality regulation that restricts the storage, handling, or use of manure and fertilizer, as well as the location, construction, or operation of manure storage facilities, must be consistent with and not more stringent than Act 38. So what that's saying is a municipality can institute a local ordinance when it comes to the storage of manure, the handling of manure, the construction of manure storage facilities, but they can only that ordinance must only be consistent and cannot be more stringent. So they can mirror what's said in Act 38. They just can't go above and beyond that. Anything that's related to non-nutrient, non-odor management ordinances are not affected by this. Municipalities still have the authority to implement anything else they deem fit that doesn't conflict with the Act 38 law or other state laws. If a local ordinance is implemented that is more stringent than Act 38, a farmer does have an avenue where they can challenge that local ordinance through a request to the Attorney General's office. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit here regarding right to farm law and acre. These two are kind of confused quite often, thinking that they're one and the same, but they are two very they're two similar, but also very distinct laws. In fact, acre that resides in Act 38 alongside the nutrient management, odor management programs. So I got something here. I'm gonna kind of more or less read to you all, just because these items can get confusing, and I don't want to give anybody the wrong information here. So I apologize. I'm going to read from the screen here a little bit. But this is all good and important information. So in Pennsylvania, the Right to Farm Act, Agriculture Area Security Law, and acre work together to provide protection to farmers and their farmland from nuisance lawsuits and urban sprawl, which is defined as the uncontrolled expansion of urban areas. The Right to Farm Act protects the farmers from nuisance lawsuits that claim a nuisance due to the normal agricultural operations of the farm. Generally, to be protected by the Right to Farm Act, the farm must have been in existence and substantially unchanged for at least 1 year. And then the Right to Farm Act also requires that municipalities exclude normal agricultural operations from the definition of a public nuisance in any municipality and any municipal ordinance, so long as the operation does not adversely impact public health and safety. So you can see that Right to Farm Act is very critical, especially when you kind of look at it in the eyes of the Act 38 program as well. Some of these larger farms do have a bit of an impact, or can have an impact to their neighbors, but luckily, as long as what they're doing is deemed as a normal agriculture operation, they are safe from these nuisance lawsuits. So nuisance lawsuits, they may arise from neighbors who dislike different aspects of living near a farm, such as routine smells and sounds. And the Right to Farm Act provides farmers with an affirmative defense that hopefully cuts off litigation at the front end and prevents lengthy court battles. And that's important, that we don't want to see it would be difficult for ag operators if they were constantly having to be in court to defend what they're doing. So then moving on to acre here. Acre, or the Agricultural Communities and Rural Environmental Act, prohibits the enactment of local ordinances that treat normal agriculture operations as nuisances, similar to the Right to Farm Act. Importantly, acre provides farmers with an inexpensive method of challenging local ordinances by petitioning the Attorney General to investigate and enforce acre against a municipality if the municipality has enacted an unlawful ordinance or is otherwise unduly burdening an agricultural operation. So you can hopefully kind of see the differences between acre and Right to Farm. Acre is regarding local ordinances, Right to Farm is more so nuisance lawsuits. So again, I apologize for kind of having to read through some of that, but I wanted to make sure I was providing the most accurate information possible, because these do come up time to time. Luckily, not much of this is anything you'd have to deal with in your day-to-day job, but it does come up. Next slide, Nate. I'm getting towards the end of my time, so I want to make sure I give everybody adequate time to take a break. I think that comes up next. So a little bit about the right to know law. This really only applies to anybody on here who's a conservation district employee, a state employee, anybody who's with NRCS or the federal government. This a lot of this may not apply to you just because you would operate under different rules and requirements that Dan outlined earlier. But anyways, the right to know law provides citizens the right of access to public records, and the law determines what documents are deemed a public record for just about everything that would be located at the county conservation district is subject to right to know, except for any financial information you may have on file regarding a cost share project. But definitely anything that it comes into play with a lot of the plans, so an Ag E&S plan, manure management plan, nutrient management plan, odor management plan, they're all subject to right to know. They're especially the nutrient management plan. That is a public document because it is approved at a public meeting. A key aspect here is only documents that exist are in possession of the agency are accessible. So that means you are not required to create a requested record. Provides access and response process to how and when to handle a right to know request. Hopefully anybody who's at a district or a state agency, you know who your right to know officer is. So check with your manager, your supervisor. That way you are aware if you get a right to know request who should be handling that. And then again, as Dan talked about earlier, certain records, they are protected by Section 1619. Next slide there, Nate. So I think you all thought I'd let you go without testing your knowledge, but that's not the case here. We're going to have just a little quiz, and so go ahead, next slide. So for number one, feel free to type in the chat, unmute yourself and shout it out. But when would an Ag E&S plan be required? Maybe everybody's asleep. I don't know. I see. Okay, I see him coming in now. D, all of the above. That is correct. Number two, true or false? Only CAOs and CAFOs are regulated. Is that true or false? All right, I see all the falses coming in. That is accurate. Every operation is technically regulated. Whether you have to have a nutrient management plan, manure management plan, Ag E&S plan, they all have a regulation tied to them. True or false? With regard to Chapter 105, construction activities cannot proceed until approval or acknowledgement is received from the DEP or delegated conservation district. All right, we got some trues coming in. That is accurate. And then true or false? A local ordinance may be more stringent than Act 38 requirements. What do we got there? All right, I see a mixture. So that would actually be false. The local ordinance cannot be more stringent than Act 38 requirements, but it can be consistent. All right, Nate, go ahead and go to the next slide. I think we're pretty much wrapping up here. So here you'll see some DEP contacts for the various programs. You got your field reps there and some and then on the right there, you got contacts for different areas of some of the programs we talked about today. Next slide. Here we have our some State Conservation Commission contacts regarding the programs we talked about today. So they're listed are the regional coordinators for the different regions of the state. There's my contact information, and there is also Carl Diamond's contact information for odor management. And then I think we're on to the last slide. So there's Nate's contact information and my contact information. So if you need to reach out to either one of us, feel free. We're always available to answer your questions. Nate, anything else to add before we end?
Nope. The only thing I want to say is thank you, and I will work on getting a copy of this PowerPoint out to everyone so you guys have all the links that we showed throughout.
All right, thanks y'all. And Chris, I believe I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you both very much. We appreciate it. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, everybody. I'll put a timer up on my screen, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. So 10:05. All right, welcome back. Hopefully everybody had a chance to stretch and refresh their coffees. Last two sessions coming up here. Jen Weld is next up on basic soil properties. Jen, if you are ready to share your screen, we can get started.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Everyone should be seeing my screen now, just the title slide, basic soil properties.
Yep, you're good.
Great, thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jen Weld. I work for Penn State University in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management. I'm part of the soils faculty in that department, but I'm also the PA One Stop Director. I may know many of you in that capacity. I'm presenting this presentation, but it was jointly prepared by Yuri Plowden. She did a lot of the slide preparation, so definitely a joint effort between Penn State and NRCS in preparing this information. Just a brief background about myself. I may not have met all of you in our travels. I'm originally from the Philadelphia area, native to Pennsylvania. I completed my bachelor's at Cornell University in the Department of Ag and Bioengineering and Environmental Systems Technology, which really focused on the integration of soil science, soil conservation, design and development of conservation systems. Completed my master's with Doug Beagle at Penn State, then worked in the nutrient management education program, developing tools such as the standard format spreadsheets for nutrient management specialists. Returned to school to complete my PhD, and then started in my current position. So definitely looking forward to working with everybody throughout this workshop and training. So the objectives for this presentation are to introduce, maybe for some of you even review, soil properties or soil science properties and principles. And as we step through these principles is to start to create connections between these properties and soil functions. So kind of the soil basics. Soil is a combination of minerals, organic matter, water and air, and this all forms on the land surface. We typically think of soils and variations of soils on kind of what I refer to as the horizontal plane, right? The soil surface, what we can see. There's also variation as we move down through the soil on the vertical plane, and we'll look at that this morning. Soils can support growth of plants. There's a strong interest in that particular function of soils, especially around agronomic management and soil management. But in addition to physical properties, there are biological properties, right? There are countless numbers of bacteria, microorganisms, fungi that exist within the soils that create kind of an environment, a soil environment all of its own that support different soil functions in different ways. And there are many different types of soils, not only domestically within the United States, but globally. The soil types, the variations are pretty amazing in how they form throughout the world. So soil does have critical functions. I think probably the one that we think of most frequently is food. The ability to use soils as a medium for food growth, incredibly important to meeting the needs of our world's population. It's also a habitat for soil organisms. Those soil organisms are important, as we'll also see this morning, for different soil properties, formation of soil properties, and how we maintain that habitat for these soil organisms definitely influences how we can use soils as a medium for food production. Water also filters water. Soil also filters water, which contributes to our drinking water and reuse of water that we use every day. So we recycle nutrients through our soil. That includes carbon, also nitrogen and phosphorus. And also importantly, and I always bring this one up because sometimes I feel like it's overlooked, is that soil serves as a foundation for construction, for roadbeds, development of structures on farming operations and non-farming operations and buildings. And that is an important use that we have of our soils and continue to have in our soils as we build and renovate our infrastructure. So soils form in different ways. There's unique combinations of soil formation, but they all form under a certain kind of set of conditions, and they're known as the soil forming conditions, or more typically as soil forming factors. So what we see here at the bottom is an equation of those soil forming factors. And we know that as CLORPT is how we refer to it. So it's climate, organisms, relief, parent material, and time. These are the 5 main soil forming factors that kind of drive how soils form in different locations under different conditions. So climate generally refers to temperature and precipitation. Relief is our landscapes, our topography. Organisms, that's our biota. They are our microorganisms that exist within our soils and thrive within our soils. Parent material typically refers to geology, and all of these factors come together and interact in unique ways over time. So these soil forming factors form our soils. So we're going to step through and look at these, just an overview of each one and some of the implications. So climate really influences how fast a soil forms. Other pieces too, but warm, moist climates will mean that soils are going to develop more quickly. Slower or cold or even arid conditions will result in soils forming more slowly, right? Those types of conditions can slow down chemical processes, chemical reactions can also slow down microbial reactions as well. So cold, arid conditions will slow down soil forming processes. Organisms critically important to how soils form. Plant roots, animals create burrows, right? Burrowing animals, that changes how soils form. Bacteria have the ability to break down large soil particles into smaller ones, but also native vegetation is extremely important. The type of vegetation that exists on a landscape can determine contributed in large part to how soils form. You know, classic example is a forested landscape versus kind of a prairie landscape. It's one we frequently use when we talk about the soil forming factors. And what we're looking at here are 2 soil profiles, and a soil profile is basically just the vertical layers. It's an image, or if you're in the field, you're actually looking at a soil pit, and it is the vertical layers of a soil. We're going to look at those later on. So the first layer of the soil is what's known as the A horizon. And on the left here, we have a prairie, and on the right, we have a forest. And you can see that the prairie has, different types of native vegetation, right? It's going to have those prairie grasses with deep roots as compared to a forest, which is going to have either deciduous or coniferous trees, very different native vegetation. And this has resulted in very different soil formation. We have a much deeper surface horizon, or A horizon. It's darker, indicating that there's more organic matter in the prairie as compared to the forest. So, that native vegetation on the landscape makes a difference in how soils form. Parent material is an interesting one. It typically relates to the geology of the area and soils ultimately inherent traits from their parent material. The type of geology will determine how soils form, the characteristics, the properties, could be water holding capacity, whatever it might be, will be determined in part by the parent material. Parent material, there's different types. There is what we refer to as in place, which means that the soils really don't move. You often see this on the summit of a hill, a flat area. The soils will just form in place. There's what's known as colluvium, and that means the soils are moving by gravity. Often see this on back slopes or sloped areas. And then we have alluvium, which means that the parent material is moving by water, right? On a larger scale, you can see differences in parent material by glaciation and how soils and materials are moved by glaciers, also by wind if there's a lot of wind activity. So this type of parent material can be at a very small scale, like a hill slope, but can also be at a very large scale where glaciers and blowing winds influence the parent material. Topography, this is where you're located on the landscape. It can make a difference in the depths of soils, with deeper soils being at the bottom of hills as materials move by gravity. and water moving particles downhill, and time. All of these factors work over time. Soils form over a very long period of time, millions of years. Soils are still forming, but they form very, very slowly. So in terms of parent material, the parent material in Pennsylvania and in many areas, but we'll look at Pennsylvania specifically, is influenced by our physiographic regions. We have 6 different physiographic regions or provinces in Pennsylvania, and each of those will have different types of parent material. Soil particles, other materials have been moved into these areas by different processes or forces. So I'll visit landscape position a little bit, and I mentioned this. In addition to that larger scale kind of physiographic region, on the individual landscape position, you can see different types of parent material or the influence of that landscape position with kind of in place, or what we refer to as residuum parent materials at these kind of flatter summit areas at the top of hill slopes. As you move, we'll stay in the upland areas, but as you move kind of down that more steeply sloped back slope, that's where you start to see what's referred to as colluvium, or material that's being moved by water and gravity, mostly by gravity. Those types of parent materials, you're going to see very sharp-edged rocks. They're going to be distributed in kind of an erratic or irregular pattern because everything is being moved by gravity. As you move into kind of the floodplain areas, this is where you're going to see what's referred to as less developed soils. Typically here, parent material is going to be moved by water and known as alluvium. So you're going to see rocks that are sorted, very smooth because of the water action as it compared to those that are moved by gravity. Landscape position is also important from the concept that certain parts of the landscape receive, for example, more sun than others. So you can have differences just within, and this is a very good example, for example, different sides of a landscape in terms of what's referred to as the microclimate or the temperature or the amount of sun exposure that can occur on each location. So that is another factor as well when we think about landscape position. Relief. So often we think of relief when we talk about soil forming factors as the influence of water flow and soil formation. We're specifically here going to focus on the idea that there can be landscapes within these kind of upland areas that are what are referred to as either divergent, meaning down here that the water is moving down the hill or across the landscape away from each other. And there are convergent areas where the water is moving towards each other. And this makes a difference in terms of where you may, for example, identify, here we have a convergent area, potential areas of hydric soils, also maybe where you have wetland soils, or perhaps just where you have soils that don't drain particularly well, where there's water in these areas for longer periods of time during the year, again, influencing soil formation. So as soils form, and as we start to look at soils, there is an average soil composition, kind of what we look at or consider what is the ideal soil composition. And that is 50% pore space and 50% solids. So ideally, the pore space in a soil should be 25% water and 25% air, right? Some water and some air. And you should have 45% mineral composition of solids and 5% organic matter. So there should be this kind of ideal soil composition. Whether we achieve that or not, that ideal composition, it varies over time. This is an active living system, so it's never going to be that exact composition all the time, but that's kind of what we set as our standard when we start to explore soils and soil composition. So organic matter is extremely important in soils. It influences not only physical properties, but also chemical properties. It definitely influences and improves the soil physical condition. Soils are aggregated by both plant and animal residues, which are organic matter. Increased water infiltration, because the organic matter can kind of absorb and hold the water, whether it's rainwater or runoff. And it improves soil tilth. And this is important as we start to consider using soils for food production and for agronomic management, right? Because soil tilth is when we start to look at the properties or the suitability of a soil for agronomic production. And this looks at properties such as soil aggregation, how uniform the soil is, are there animal and manure residues present? So we really start in soil health look at a combination of different soil properties and how suitable that soil is for agronomic or food production. And organic matter plays a role in that, and how suitable a soil may or may not be. So organic matter has two portions. There's a living portion. This is where we look at, our microorganisms, which may be bacteria or fungi, but also, our larger organisms such as insects, earthworms, also burrowing animals such as rabbits or groundhogs, all play an important role in organic matter and how soils form. Also plant roots. I think sometimes we overlook when we talk about soil organic matter, but specifically soil organisms and how they influence soil organic matter, the plant roots themselves, right? Whether they are living and releasing, organic substances that help bind soils together, or whether they move into that kind of second category of dead organic matter, where those plant roots may be decomposing. Along with dead microorganisms and other organisms such as insects and earthworms, and how those organisms decay in the soil and release plant nutrients, help to build soil structure, and provide food for other organisms that may be living in the soil. So soil organic matter has these two portions that work together in a cycle. So there are organic soils. They are unique soils. They have organic horizons. They are mostly consisting of decomposed organic material. There are peats. They are kind of the least decomposed of the organic soils. There's a mucky peat, which is somewhere in between. And then there's a muck soil. And that is a very heavy organic soil. It is highly decomposed. And these are unique soils that are found in unique conditions where there's a lot of organic matter contribution from the different soil forming factors. There are also mineral soils. Mineral soils are going to be much more typical of the types of soils that we will see in Pennsylvania. They are composed primarily of sand, silt, and clay. They will also have organic matter. If we think back to that kind of ideal composition of a soil, the solids, which make up 50% of the soil, you want 45% mineral, which is our sand, silt, and clay, and 5% organic matter. These soils are much more common, again, of what we will see in Pennsylvania. So soils have, when we look at mineral soils, soils have a texture. That texture is made up of three types of soil particles, specifically sand, silt, and clay. So sand is our largest soil particle. It's going to range specifically from 2 to 0.05 millimeters. These particles, and you can think about if you've ever been to a coastal area or to a beach, you're going to be able to see these in your hand. You'll be able to feel them. They're very coarse and gritty. I think we're all pretty familiar with what sand looks and feels like. Then there's kind of our middle or moderate particle, which is silt, and that is going to be 0.05 to 0.002 millimeters. You are not going to be able to see silt without the aid of typically a microscope, but it has a very smooth, floury type feeling. It's a very distinct feel, and you can see that here, this particular illustration shows what we refer to as this picture and the clay, what we refer to as the ribbon test, where you take soil in your hand, and we'll do this in the field as part of boot camp, and you start to make a ribbon with the soil. And as you do that, if you have a soil that has a lot of silt, it's a very floury, kind of powdery feel to it. And then we have our clay particle, which is less than 0.02 millimeters. You can only see clay with an electron microscope. It is very stiff and sticky, what you would traditionally think of as clay. And you can see here with this same field test, where we do a field test for texture known as the ribbon test, you can see that unlike the silt, a soil that's high in clay will actually start to form a ribbon. So these three particles make up soil texture. The sizes of these particles are very important. They are specific to soil science and to soil taxonomy. If you're working in the area of engineering, sometimes these sizes are a little bit different. But in soil science, with non-engineering functions, we use these standard sizes to define what sand, silt, and clay are. So the soil texture, the percent sand, silt, and clay is combined into 12 different soil textural classes. And the way that soil textural classes are identified is by using what's referred to as the soil textural triangle. So the soil textural triangle has on the bottom here the percent sand, the percent clay, and the percent silt. So once you know the percentages of each of the soil particles, you can use those to identify which soil textural class that might fall into. So if you have a 15% sand, a 15% clay, so 15% sand, 15% clay, 70% silt, you're going to have a silt loam soil textural class, which is kind of a moderate or medium textured soil. So then the question becomes, how do you determine what those percent sand, silt, and clay percentages of sand, silt, and clay are? So there are field tests, and we looked at those as ones referred to as the ribbon test, where you can estimate that. But there is a laboratory test known as the hydrometer test or the particle size distribution, where the specific percentages by using a settling process and a hydrometer. This is also sometimes known as the hydrometer method to determine the specific amount of sand, silt, and clay. And this allows us then to use the soil textural triangle to determine what the soil textural class is. But the question becomes is why do we need to know the soil textural class, right? One, it's part of our soil taxonomy or soil classification system. All soils are classified, and one of those classifications is the soil texture. But it also helps us to understand whether we have, for example, a soil that's very high in clay, a soil that's very high in sand, or a soil that is what we refer to as a more medium textured soil, such as a silt loam. And this can have implications as we start to understand the different uses and functions of soils, specifically around available water holding capacity, the ability to produce agronomic crops, but also as we look at engineering applications and suitability for foundations and what needs to be done possibly to build a structure on different soils. So if we look at a very fine textured soil, which is typically a higher percentage of clay, and we start to look at pore space, and pore space becomes important as we look at how soils can either hold or release water and nutrients. So we have our fine textured soil here on the right and our coarse textured soil here on the left. So what's interesting is the coarse textured soil, which is typically a high percentage sandy soil, has less overall pore space, but the pores are larger, right? You can see a lot of this yellow kind of space around these brown soil particles. So that means that water is going to move rapidly and associated nutrients rapidly through the soil. This is opposed to a more finely textured soil, higher percentage of clay, where you have smaller pores, but there's more total pore space. So this can have benefits. The soil will be able to stay in this, the water will be able to stay in the soil longer. Nutrients will be able to stay in the soil longer, right? Making the water and nutrients available to plants. But if the water stays there too long, that can create situations where the soil doesn't drain well, and you may start to have perched water tables and different situations like that. So there's a trade-off, right, between these finely textured soils and these coarse textured soils. But our medium textured soils, such as a silt loam, kind of sit right in the middle, right? We have a lot of the benefits of a finely textured soil where the water is and nutrients are retained longer in the soil profile, but not too long to start to create concerns about drainage, and not for such a short period of time where plants can't access that water and nutrients. So plant available water, which is the water that's in the soil profile between what's referred to as field capacity and wilting point, is definitely influenced by our soil textural class, right? And so the percent sand, silt, and clay. So we have our kind of moderate or medium textured soils right in the middle, with silt loam being right in the middle, our most common or most moderate textured soil. Our very coarse textured soils are sand and clay. So you can see if we look from clay loam to sandy loam, and we look at the available water content for the plants, most of that is in these moderately textured soils. So field capacity is defined as the water that is left in the soil profile after excess water has drained out. So practically that's about 2 to 3 days after a rainstorm. Wilting point, so this line down here is the point below wilting point. Plants can no longer access the water in the soil and they will wilt. So it's kind of a permanent wilting point. So our plant available water content exists between those 2 points in the soil, and our moderately textured soils, or soils that have kind of a moderate textural class, will have the most plant available water. So in addition to soils having texture, soils also have a structure. So a structure is the arrangement of soil particles into what's referred to as PEDs, which we can see those here. They're basically small clumps of soil. So in addition to soil texture and associated soil textural classes influencing how the soil will hold or release water and nutrients, so does soil structure. So there are different common types of soil structures. There's granular, platy, prismatic, columnar, blocky, single grain, and massive. There is the way that soil structure is determined is by using what's referred to as diagnostic diagrams, where you compare the PEDs that you might see in the field with a diagram to determine which of these common types of soil structures are present in the soil. So granular and platy are very common soil structures. Granular you will often see at the soil surface. Platy is more common, and it looks like plates, just very similar to this diagram and this diagram over here, and is often the result of compaction. This is a structure that you will often see when there's compaction. Blocky, where you kind of have these block-like PEDs, will occur in what we refer to as the subsurface of the soil or horizons below the surface. And then massive is very common in the parent material, and we'll look at that, or what's known as the sea horizon, where there is virtually no structure. It's just a massive structure, and there's been very little influence on that area of the soil from the soil forming factors. So granular is very common in our medium or moderate textured soils, such as our silt loams, and it makes an ideal structure, ideal soil for agronomic production. And you can see here, this is a very good example of a granular structure. If you've ever pulled a plant out of the ground and you see the clumps attached to the roots, that's an example of granular structure. If you have compaction, you can have a granular structure, and underneath that granular structure, you can have what's known as a platy structure, indicating that there's been some influence of machinery on the structure of that soil. So soils have texture, they have structure, but they also have color. And the color is very important. It can tell us a lot about not only the water status or the drainage status of a soil, but also about the mineral content. So soils that are dark, brown or black, tend to have a lot of organic matter. And we saw that earlier when we looked at the prairie versus the forest soil profile. The prairie had that very deep layer that was very dark in color. Soils that have a high amount of iron will be very orange brown or yellowish brown. So colors can tell us about the mineral content or the organic content of the soil. You can also discern information about soil properties, such as soil drainage, water drainage, by the color. So soils that are brightly colored are typically well drained. Soils or areas of a soil that are duller, a lot of grays, or what we refer to as mottles of gray, can be an indication of an area that does not drain well, a soil that's not drained well, or an indication that there is water at a certain depth in the soil for a significant period during the year. Even if it's currently not saturated and the water isn't there when you're looking at the soil, seeing this type of what we refer to as mottles, where there's these gray colors combined with these brown or orange colors, is an indication that the water is there for a period of time. So generally, if you have good aeration and the iron is oxidized, you're in the soil, you're going to have bright colors. They're going to be yellows, browns. You can expect that those soils are well drained. If you have poor aeration, the iron is going to change state and it's going to result in duller colors, grays and blues, often mottled with these brighter colors or combined with these brighter colors, a real indication of poor drainage or a perched water table or perched water for a period of the year. So this is another good example. Again, this is a soil profile, which is an image, or if you're in the field, you're actually looking at the vertical organization of a soil. And these soil profiles are both from the same farm field location, but at two different landscape positions. The profile on the right is from the area closer to the stream, and the one on the left is from a more upland position. And you can see that the upland position is well drained. It is very brightly colored, as opposed to the position that is down closer to the stream, to the kind of wetter area. It's much duller. You're seeing kind of those lighter areas, those grays and those blues. And this would be an indication based on soil color that it's a more poorly drained area. So we do have a standard way within soil science of describing soil color. The tool that we use is the Munsell Color Book, and soil is defined by three different characteristics: the hue, the value, and the chroma. So each page of a soil Munsell Color Book or chart has three different sections. You have up here your actual color, which is 5YR, and this is going to be your hue. You have your value, and you have your chroma. And using these three properties, as well as a sample of the soil, which you hold behind the card, so the soil sample would go behind, and you compare it to the color chip, you determine what the soil color is. And this is a standard method for determining and reporting soil color. So the first piece is the hue, and this is kind of the spectral color. You know, is it red, yellow? And that allows you to select the correct spectral color, but also select the correct page on the Munsell color chart. The next piece of information that we look at is the value. So that is kind of the lightness or the darkness of the color. And that is reported based on a standard scale from 10 being pure white to 0 being pure black and gray being somewhere in the middle. So as we start to get into assessing these lightness and darkness of colors, and again, we'll work on this and have the opportunity to work with the Munsell color books in the field. You need to make sure that, for example, you're not wearing a hat, you're not wearing sunglasses, you have a moist soil, you don't have a lot of interference from direct sunlight, because you're using visual assessment of these soils to compare them to the different pages in the color book. So there are specific steps that we take in the field where we're doing this type of evaluation. And then chroma. So chroma is kind of the strength of the color. Is it kind of very gray? We see this over here at our 0 or neutral, or is it a very pure, vibrant color, right? And that is our final determination or characteristics in our soil color. So eventually soil color is reported, for example, as 7.5 YR 5/8. And that would direct someone who had the information that they had a soil that was 7 YR 5/8 to that specific page and color chip within the Munsell color book. So it's a very standardized process that we use when we're defining soil color. So soil horizons. We've looked at a couple of soil profiles throughout the presentation, which again is either a visual photographic representation, an illustration, or actually seeing it in the field in person of the vertical layers of a soil. So each vertical layer is referred to as a horizon, and horizons are identified or defined by changes in color, in texture, possibly in structure as well. Also, potentially on the influence of soil organisms such as the roots, plant roots, and how they move down through the soil vertically. So here we have an initial illustration of 3 primary horizons. We have our A horizon, which is at the surface. You can see has a very dark color. The B horizon, a slightly lighter color. And then our C horizon, which is a kind of our unconsolidated parent material. It's that part of the soil profile that has really had minimal interaction with any of the soil forming factors. This can be broken down further into the O horizon, which is the surface organic layer. Often see that in forested landscapes. The surface mineral horizon, that's typically the surface horizon, which you'll see in agricultural soils. Subsoil, which is just below the A horizon, our underlying material or parent material, our C horizon, and then our R horizon is the bedrock. So if we just kind of take a look at why we might have changes, there are a variety of reasons why we may have changes in horizons. And there's no specific number of horizons that a soil has to have. Every soil is unique and develops uniquely, and can be more or less developed depending on where it's located on a landscape. So again, you may see changes in a horizon because of color, texture, presence or absence of plant roots, changes in structure, increase or decrease in the percentage of rock fragments, and even possibly and very commonly, those presence of those mottled features, right? So we call them redoxomorphic features, but more commonly we just refer to them as mottles. And it's those grayish areas that indicate that there's water present for a period of time during the year. So we're going to step through just some examples of what this looks like. The O horizon is going to be mostly or is predominantly organic matter. It's litter, it's humus, again, often seen in forested land uses. The A horizon is the surface layer in a mineral soil. So typically the A horizon is, the first horizon that you're going to see in an agriculturally managed soil. This particular A horizon has some unique characteristics. So you can see here, this is the surface. This is the kind of boundary of our A horizon. And this would be known as an abrupt boundary. You can see it's very consistent. It's very easy to define. It doesn't really vary in depth as you move across that kind of profile, right? It's about the same depth. And that can have occurred for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it is natural soil forming processes, but more frequently it's the result of some sort of management or mechanical intervention, whether that is plowing. So this is kind of our plow layer here, or there was material that was brought into this area, right? From an engineering perspective, was there some sort of fill or other material that was brought into the area? Now, given the landscape and what we're seeing about kind of the use on the surface, this is probably a plow layer, but another way you can have this abrupt arrangement or abrupt boundaries in the arrangement of soils is also in engineering uses. E horizon is a unique horizon we see in some soils. You may not encounter this too frequently, but this is a very kind of lightly colored soil. It's going to have a very different soil color than either the A or B horizon. And this is an area of alluviation or an area where there's a lot of loss of clay and iron and aluminum. So therefore, you're going to have a very dull or bleached color to this particular horizon. The B horizon is going to be more likely the second horizon that you see in most agriculturally managed soils that you'll be working in. And this is a zone of accumulation. This will form below the O or the A horizon, or if you have an E horizon, you're going to see start to see differences in structure, definitely differences in color, as you see more accumulation of clay and iron and aluminum. The C horizon, again, this is our unconsolidated parent material. This horizon always has a massive structure. There is very little biological activity, very little physical weathering, chemical weathering, very little action of the soil forming factors in this particular horizon. So when we kind of look at horizons, we look at why horizons change, we look at the soil texture, we look at the soil structure, and all these different factors taken together, it can tell us a lot about how the soils can be managed, the soil properties, soil behavior. And one interpretation or description that we use quite frequently is drainage class in Pennsylvania. It's used in a variety of different nutrient management tools, and it really speaks to the frequency and duration of wetness that is present when a soil is forming, right? So if there is a lot of wetness, you're going to have what's referred to as these mottles. You're going to have areas that have that gray kind of color combined with the more brightly colored soils, often known as redoxomorphic features. And these drainage classes are often an indication of how well soils will drain for agronomic production in Pennsylvania. So this is a definition of the drainage classes. The drainage classes are an interpretation. They're not a measured or quantitative value, and they combine a variety of different soil properties, such as structure, horizonation, how the horizons are forming, as well as color. So as we look at these different drainage classes, if you have an excessively well-drained soil or somewhat excessively well-drained soil, you're not really going to see evidence of wetness until about 60 inches or greater. So you're not going to be seeing those mottles in the surface layers. When we look at our soil pits later on in the training, you may not see evidence of these mottles. If you have a well-drained soil, the depth to wetness starts to reduce, right, to 40 inches. And by the time you get to poorly drained or somewhat poorly drained, you're in the 0 to 8 to 0 to 20 inch kind of depth. So that has implications for how you can grow crops, how crops will be able to access water and nutrients, and how long or how frequently a soil will be wet, and what that will mean for crop production. So this is an illustration kind of where you start to see the mottling or redoxomorphic features, which are indications that there is water present in the soil profile for an extended period of time. So if you have a well-drained soil, you can see those mottles are quite far down below that 36-inch depth, and you can see the plant roots are able to extend down through that soil profile, accessing water and nutrients. As you move into your moderately well-drained, you can see those mottles are kind of moving up in depth. We're now about the 24-inch mark, and you can see the plant roots are much shorter. As you move into somewhat poorly drained, again, moving that depth to water up again, you can see you have the depth of the roots is much shallower. And finally, when you hit that poorly drained soil with a depth to water of about 8 inches, you have a very shallow root system. So there is, the potential influence of these drainage classes to be very important when we're thinking about how soils are behaving from the use of soils and the function of soils for food production and for agronomic crop production, as it influences how the roots are able to access water and nutrients, but also the depth of the roots as well. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for the time this morning. We reviewed quite a few principles about soils, from how they're formed, the soil forming factors, to texture, structure, color, horizons, and also an important interpretation that we use in Pennsylvania for how soils behave and how they can be used for agronomic production and management. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jen. Are there any questions for Jen at this time? I don't see any popping up in the chat. So we'll move on to Pete Vanderstrappen to talk about resource information to consider, maps, geology, and aerial photos. Pete, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Chris. Can you see my presentation, slide 1?
Yes, you're good to go.
Good to go. Great. Never know technology. Anyway, a little background here. I see we have quite a list of 56 people or so attending this meeting. Like I said, my name is Pete Vanderstappen. My background is I retired from NRCS about 3 years ago. I started way back when, 40 some years ago, with NRCS, or Soil Conservation Service, back in Virginia. Moved back to Pennsylvania, graduated from Penn State as an ag engineer. with NRCS, I worked a couple years doing dam rehab, dam construction. Then I switched back over to ag. I think I moved like 7 or 8 times during my career. I landed finally in Lebanon, worked out of the area office, and worked in general agriculture. Did a lot of manure pit designs over the years. Worked a bunch of years on mushroom stuff. I did some stuff on dam rehab and construction, like I said. So a broad range of experience, and I ended my career as a state engineer and retired like 3 years ago. So I bring some old school knowledge, hopefully, and some stuff that you folks can apply, or at least give you some background information today as you go out and do your planning and different things you do in the field here, and your introduction to good conservation type practices. So let's start with process started here and get my slides moving. There we go. So I'm assuming most of you are new to the background of planning process, and certainly everyone in this group's going to have a lot of different background, different experiences, and those are all good. I think one thing we need to think about is the rest of the operation. Sometimes when we go out and do planning of any kind of sort of planning, you're maybe focused on nutrient planning or conservation planning or engineering, whatever, but we also need to look at the rest of the operation. So just keep that in mind. I think one thing that you folks are going to find out pretty quickly with dealing with producers is, because of whether you're located with conservation districts or NRCS or whatever agency you're with, you're going to have some background. And I think some of the things that we end up doing is educating the producers on regulations and getting them up to date on what the current regulations are. They may not be aware of that. So sometime in the process of doing your things, we're actually going to educate the farmer on, we're delivering what's the current requirements that you need to do. As always, from NRCS and almost all the agencies, is we want solutions that meet some sort of standard, and those standards are found in the FOTG, Field Office Tech Guide. So make sure, if you haven't gone to the Field Office Tech Guide, go on your website and FOTG, pick Pennsylvania, and boy, you have a lot of resources in that, and I'll talk about those again later. The next thing is change is often a part of solution. So no matter what the purpose of why you're going out to that producer, whether it's a planning for conservation or planning for manure storage or planning for a nutrient management plan, compliance, whatever, you have a vision of what you may be doing. The farmer may have a vision of what they may be doing, and you may be on track for months on end doing something. All of a sudden you get a phone call from the producer and says, hey, something happened different. We're going to change our operation. We're going to do something different. So just be always aware of that. That's the continuing dynamics of working with agriculture, is things change all the time. And I think the last thing I'll say on this is that producers generally like to talk about how they operate their facilities. And my background, I grew up on a 40 cow dairy operation, and after that I went to college and all those kind of things. I have a sister that's milking 1,200 cows, a brother that's milking 300 cows. So make sure, whether you're going out to a dairy operation, a duck farm, a sheep operation, get a good conversation going with the producer and how they manage their operation, because everyone seems to have a different method that they feel is the way their operation works the best and how they operate things. So just keep that in mind, that they generally like to talk a lot, and they'll tell you what's going on, and then you got to get your information from those conversations. Couple things to think about, in the farm economy, depending on the situation, the time of year, and the economics, a lot of things that we may run into. There are ways to solve a lot of issues without spending a lot of money. So management change can solve that. The other thing I want to think about too is when you go out to a farm, looks like today, it's a great day. It's going to be 60 degrees out. You're looking at a agriculture operation, an animal concentration area, whatever. It doesn't look too bad today, but put in your mindset that what's this going to look like in January, February, March? What's it going to look like if it rains for a week? So always keep that in mindset, is you may be out there on a pristine day, but if you go out some other day, it's going to look way different. So think about hate to say worst case scenarios. In discussion, if you're going out to a producer that has issues or issues have been identified, boy, it's always good if you can somehow get the farmer mindset, or they seem to come up with a solution that will solve the problem, meets our standards, and they come up with the idea. Because if the farmer buys into the concept of, gee, this is an issue, and yeah, I see how we can solve this, and they think that's the way to solve it, boy, the opportunity of making sure that really happens is critical. And if they buy into it, then you know they're going to implement it. If we come up with an idea they don't like, it's really tough for farmers to implement anything. So the other thing you got to think about farmers too is it's not sometimes we go out there and make a sales pitch or discuss things with them. It's going to take time. They're not going to make a decision right away. So keep that in mind. It does take time, and building relationships over time is the way to go. So folks should probably already seen this thing, but there's multiple steps of planning. It's a balancing act. You're trying to weigh all these different things against the economic goals of the producer and some environmental regulations, maybe utilities. There's all kinds of things that are going to factor into whatever planning process you're working on. You're trying to balance all those things. So there's a lot of different things going on all the time. So keep that in mind. The type of plan that you're focusing on can make a difference. Whether it's a grazing plan, conservation plan, nutrient management plan, maybe it's an ag waste management plan, E&S control, irrigation plan, Act 38 plan, and there's other plans. So maybe your current position is focusing on writing a plan for a certain aspect of that operation, but just keep in mind, like I talked about before, all these other plans are going on, so we can make sure that the ag waste management plan somehow may need to tie into their grazing plan. If those two don't mesh, then it's not going to work out. So sometimes, even though we're focused on one little plan, the rest of the operation has to tie into that. So always keep that in mind that, yeah, we're focused on one plan, but other plans may be in the works or they need to mesh together somehow. Preparation for planning. So I think this is always a challenge. You get a phone call that you're going to a new producer, a new landowner, or a new issue, whatever. Maybe you have an address. There's some things you can do in advance that might help you get a leg up on the situation, so that when your producer starts talking to you or the landowner starts talking, you have some knowledge of what's going on. So maybe in the good old days, depends where you're at, you might have some actual hard folder files with some information on that particular producer. Pull them up and maybe gives you a historical background of what's been going on out there. And these digital stuff too. Maybe someone else in the office says, "Oh yeah, I've been out that guy several times or lady farmer several times," and they might have some general background information that you might want to know. The interesting thing I think to talk about is if you're totally unfamiliar with the type of operation, and like my experience, I grew up in a dairy background, but if I go out to let's say a duck operation, I don't know how ducks are raised and what's the process in that. So there is opportunities, and I'll show you some different resources that you folks can go to read about some duck operations or read about sheep or beef or dairy or whatever you're looking at. There's always good resource information that you could get some background information on. So the difference between a heifer and a bull, milk cow, close-up cow, and all these different terms that every kind of operation has. Those are the kind of things you're going to learn over time. So one obvious one is the Ag Waste Field Management Handbook. And if you can't find that where you're at, and talk to anybody with NRCS, they'll guide you to that, and I'll show you that later. YouTube videos. YouTube videos are another great source of information on general farming practices. I happen to watch what's the one on occasion I do see is the 10th Generation Farmer. It's a young kid in Lancaster County, just going through the daily grind of what he does on a farm in the different seasons, like filling silo, filling his bunk silo, feeding his animals, all those kind of things. Well, if you've never seen that, if you have no farm background, just watch a couple clips on that to get a kind of idea what that farmer does, but that might give you an insight into what you're getting into. And we'll talk about two other things here, in aerial and soil information. So maybe you should think about developing a checklist. Time is important, and you're going out there for a mission. If you're writing a nutrient management plan, or you're writing a ag waste management plan, or going to design something for that producer, you need to gather a certain amount of information. So if you need a plan, maybe you need a checklist. The first couple of times you go out on something, you'll try to want to remember everything. So a short checklist, or other people say, well, you need to make sure you get the number of animals, their weight, all these kind of things. Think about that. Maybe you can put a short checklist together so you don't forget things. So most programs, depending on whether it's ag waste or maybe a nutrient management, they may have a template of what the final product is to look like, or they might have a checklist. see if you can look those up and get those in advance and take a look at them. That'll give you some ideas of things. Gee, here's what my final product looks like. I got to fill all these blanks in. During your conversation with that producer, you'll have an opportunity to gather all the information. One good one that we look at is you can either have an information or job sheet. And an example you can look up later is the, I think we did in boot camp, we'll actually show you this one, but CNMP Engineering Inventory Worksheet. And that's found in section 3 of your Field Office Tech Guide under CNMP 2003-23 or later. So this is one of your, we're going to give you a little assignment after this virtual class today, but at some point in time, try to go back and look this thing up and find it in the Field Office Tech Guide. But it's 5 or 6 pages, a lot of blanks, a lot of numbers to fill in, but it's a nice template if you're gathering information to write a nutrient management plan. Or maybe in my case, as an engineer, the farmer already has a nutrient management plan. I can get some of that information for my CNMP checklist from the nutrient management plan. So a couple different ways. Checklists are a great opportunity to make sure you gather all their information up. The other thing I was looking at the other day, and it's amazing to me, you know, like I said, I've worked over 40 some years, but there's always new stuff and new organization of information. And here's another interesting one: National Resource Concern List and Planning Criteria. It's 49 pages long. It's a guidance for all resource concerns. And we're going to talk about, you know, resource concerns in Boot Camp 1. Like, I forget how many there are, 30, 40, or 50 of those resource concerns. And maybe someone's already mentioned this, but certainly it's a guidance for all resource concerns. It's in section 3 of the Field Office Tech Guide. When you open up Field Office Tech Guide for Pennsylvania, on the left-hand side, you'll see section 1, 2, and hit 3, and go to here, and you'll find the fact sheets for each one. And I'll show you, and here's an example for water pathogens. So water pathogens, surface water, very generic description, what goes on, typical causes, and examples of typical solutions. So if you're confused about resource concern, what are they talking about, these resource concerns? This is a good resource that goes through all the different resource concerns in one page, kind of easy bullet to take a look at and give you some ideas of what that term really means. And then it also gives you some typical causes and some solutions. Certainly a lot of good background information to make you more, you know, when you get out the field, you'll have some good background information to understand what's going on and find out what, you know, maybe help in the direction of solutions. So it's a really good resource concern. So here's an example project. Landowner has issued stormwater, his or her site. You got a contact number, phone number, address. You don't know the property lines, but at least you know the address. Some things you can look at. And here again, aerial information, you know, Google Earth Pro. You know, on the left-hand side, it has a, make sure you learn how to use the stuff. It has a history bar up on top there. And you can actually go through probably 10 years back or more, but you can actually go through time on that historical imagery bar. And then you can see, boy, back in 2019 on this particular one, there were no animals or sheds here. And in 2022, now we have animals, a shed, and maybe a potential ACA developing here in the middle of the farm. So it kind of gives you some historical background of what's going on. And also, if it's within the last year or so, kind of a snapshot, you may be going out for one thing, but boy, on this visual, you can certainly see that there might be some other opportunities here to take a look at. And here's one that you probably won't use too often, more related to engineers and technicians, but USGS has a StreamStats thing, great program that you can do watershed delineation. But this particular farm here, and it's in the center of the page there, and now we can see where they have a pond now, and this is where the flow is. When you're getting out there that particular day, this might be dry to ditch, and if you don't know the ponds up here, you may not know that, but it certainly gives you an idea of, if we're looking at issues down here, here's the water flow, the drainage area, and those kind of things. So not commonly used, but it's just another tool that may be used after you go out to the site to get some more information. And now, folks, we're really going old school. All else fails, maybe you have a site topo or USGS map, and sometimes that's not as commonly used anymore, but it's out there, you know, for everybody else these days. I asked a technician the other day. We got an aerial photo of this. I circled a map, sent it off to a technician, said, hey, I want to aerial this location, and I want LiDAR map and elevations, and they can produce that map pretty quick. So that's pretty cool. But, you know, the old school USGS maps. If you happen to, you can go online, look at them, and if you're really in an old field office, they might even copy these things, but it really gives you a lot of background information that may not pop up normally. So just, hey, it might be a source of information if you're really digging deep. Street view, the little guy jumps off your ortho and dump down here. So I'm looking at the street now. I can see that. Remember the farm we talked about? Here's the barn, here's the new shed, and here's the area. So can't see much from street view here, but at least it's an opportunity to get some more visuals of where you're going, what you're going to be seeing, looking at in time of year. Soils information. I give credit to Jen Wow. I love the fact that she mentions, does a great explanation of soils. And, soils in most of our work on conservation practices, nutrient management plans, E&S control, all those kind of things, it all goes back to what kind of soils you have on that particular land. And if you happen to work in a county for more than a year or two or over years, you need to get to know the common soils that you find in your county. Whether they're Berks, Chandler loam, I can't think, there's all kinds of holly, there's all kinds of different soils out there, but eventually you're going to come across the fact that you're going to get to know maybe 10 or 15 soils. And by knowing the description of the soils, are they dry, are they wet, different things like that, when you look at a map and you see the soils information, you can now, when you talk to the producer and you've already seen the soils information and you happen to know where its fields are, said, yeah, over that hill, over that field over there, it's pretty wet in the spring. I said, well, you got holly soils along the edge of the field. That's going to be pretty wet, and some other soils. So soils information is kind of the background information, but it's really fundamental to a lot of things that we do. Soils can make a big difference and impact on agriculture production, nutrient uptake, and from the engineering side, it does play a role too, from cost and economics. And we mainly look at, let's see the next one here. Yeah. So how knowing soils will help. So I think the training was great that Jen gave today, gives you some good background information. Web Soil Survey has tons of information there that can really help you out. But like I said, knowing soil names and associated hydric conditions can make a big difference on what you're looking at. If it's a wet soil, there's going to be limitations of what the producer can do, or dry soil. Certain soils are named with, I think of karst topography here. I'm down here in Lebanon County. We have a lot of limestone rock and those kind of things. So depending on the soil's name and stuff, hearing a certain type of soils, I'll know that, boy, there's a lot of limestone underneath that field. How's that going to affect maybe manure application? And maybe from an engineering point of view, it's going to affect, we have limestone ridges everywhere. If we want to do any kind of manure storage and those kind of things, we got to look at placement. We got to think about sinkholes. We got to think about cost. Maybe moving a pit a couple hundred feet somewhere else can get out of the karst area, get in more to a shale area or something like that, so we can save some excavation costs. And the last comment I'll make in just general, talk about clay or shaly soils. If you live in certain counties, that that maybe the northern part of the county has more shale soils, so maybe that's more inclined to have more drought, can cause bigger problems in those farms than the farms with clay soils that hold the water tighter. So all these just general nuances come back to the idea that if you look at a soil survey on that particular farm and you work in that particular geographic area for a while, you can get a lot of information from the soils and knowing how they react to plant production, manure application, engineering applications, those kind of things. So knowing the soils is kind of a fundamental thing. It's kind of in the background, but you really need to think about that on a regular basis. I threw this in here. I'm not sure what we're doing, but be ready for the field, appropriate clothing, bug spray, sunscreen, all that kind of stuff, clipboard, notebook, some sort of method to document the information. And you got to, it's always tough to say the farmer's talking, you got to kind of stop and write this stuff down because you just can't remember everything. And you got a lot of information you need to gather. So write it down. Photos. I always ask, and most farmers, we don't share photos with anybody else, but from NRCS point of view, but photos is a big thing. Take some pictures if you can. You can see did that barn have a roof gutter on or a downspout, or what was going on here. Take some pictures as you're going around, whether looking at good things or bad things. You'll take a lot of pictures. It's a great resource to bounce back on when maybe you won't get to writing a report or working on that project for a month from now. Boy, those photos can really, really help you out. Biosecurity, I'm sure they're going to talk about it once we get in the field, but that's a big thing. with the avian influenza and even dairy and stuff, it's becoming more prevalent. So be aware of biosecurity, and certainly we got to follow it, whatever the farmer wants to do for their practices. And beyond that, it's going to be depending on the situation, how the biosecurity plays for vehicles, like, only one visit for maybe poultry per day, or maybe we're not going out there anymore. I don't know, but just be aware and keep up to date on what the biosecurity is. And NRCS is going to have some pretty straightforward guidelines, and hopefully the districts and everybody will follow that. And folks, hate to say this, you might have to remind people that they need to be following biosecurity. So plastic boots, washing your boots, all those kind of things. So just be aware of that. Other resources. So this is kind of a broad page of things to think about, especially when you're getting into areas of agricultural operation that you may not have a lot of knowledge on. You're going to learn a lot from the one-on-one experience that you're going to have with each producer that you go out and talk to. That's a great source of information. But there's also all kinds of other things to look at, and I want to go down through this list here. So Section 3, Resource Concern and Planning Criteria in the Field Office Tech Guide. Take a look at that, folks. There's several documents in there. We talked about the one with all the different resource concerns. There's another one for ACA planning. It's a good checklist of good background information to think about. If you really want to get into ag waste management, go to the Ag Waste Management Field Handbook, Planning Considerations, Chapter 2, Part 651. If you can't find this information, just ring to an NRCS person, and they should be able to get you to it. E-directives. Chapter 9 of the Ag Waste Management Systems is another great chapter. These books, there used to be books, now you all online stuff, but these things have a lot of good information. We just got to spend, I got to spend not an hour and take a look at these kind of resources and get some good background information of different options that could be out there. Obviously, the PA, NRCS technical and other resources on the web. So we have that. There's a site on the, if you go to the Pennsylvania website for Pennsylvania, under technical resources, there's a bunch of stuff in there. The other is other agency folks. So you're working with, maybe if you're NRCS, you're working with maybe conservation districts or DEP, whoever you're working with. They may have some other good information that might help you out. And as it always goes back to, the operator and the owner is the key person at that time. And let's talk about that a little bit. So you get some challenges sometime with at least in agriculture that I see is you may be out there, let's just say you have a resource concern on a dairy farm, manure running somewhere that no one wants it to run, and you get out there and you're talking to the person that's running the farm. Looks like the owner to you, he's a 50, 60-year-old gentleman, coming to find out that his dad still owns the farm and he makes all the decisions. He may not even be there. His dad's 80 years old and doesn't want to spend any money. So, you're going to run into those key challenges. Or the husband's talking, but he said, his wife may have a big influence on what's going on. So a lot of times it's kind of interesting challenge to say who's the actual decision maker and who holds the purse string. So that's always kind of a challenge that I see in agriculture, to work with those folks to do that. But I will tell you one thing from my experience, and one thing is, as engineers and as all of us, safety is a consideration. Safety is important because agriculture is a very dangerous operation. And I think about, for ag waste, having good fences around manure storage and those kind of things. But if you really want to push safety issues somehow, at least for hate to say the male population, you need to get to the female side of the fence, and the mothers and wives and stuff like that. They're the ones that really will push the safety issues, especially if it gets into an issue. So just be aware of that. But safety is an important thing to think about. Not only your personal safety going out to the farm, but also safety of whatever practice we're dealing with and those kind of things. So keep that in mind. YouTube is also another great source. There's so many farmers and different operations. I've watched multiple YouTube clips a year or two ago on a lady raising sheep. The whole process of raising sheep and had sheep, all that kind of stuff. It was really insightful information. And I might have gone to 2 or 3 sheep operations in the last 15 years. So I don't get that, don't see too many of those, but certainly that's kind of a good background stuff. And we also have the National Planning Handbook. So all these are really great different resources that you can use to really help you out in your planning process. And like I said, take a look at this list, but I really want you to go to that Field Office Tech Guide Section 3, take a look at those. And you also have the technical resources page on the NRCS website. So go to PA, NRCS, and go to the Pennsylvania website, and there's a big box that says technical resources. Open that box up, and there's a whole bunch of charts in there. And there's one for CNMP planning, there's one for engineering. Boy, there's a lot of good information that's really focused and targeted to Pennsylvania needs and stuff like that. So, like I said, there's a lot of good locations for that kind of information. And with that, I'm going to stop and say, appreciate you folks listening to me, and I look for the opportunity of seeing you guys out in the real world on a planning day for the Boot Camp 1. I didn't see any questions, but I doubt if anybody had a chance. I yacked too fast. But Chris, any thoughts or final comments here? I think I'm
no questions.
On time.
Yeah, you're ahead of time, Pete. No questions. I did drop in the Photog website in the chat so people can access that quickly. Stream Stats is there as well. The Pennsylvania Imagery Navigator and Download Tool and Web Soil Survey. So for those of you that did not see that in the chat, those links are there. I would recommend. I would recommend that you bookmark them because you will be using them.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much time. And like I said, I retired 3 years ago, folks. And the last, where was it? Oh, so I'm still working part-time for our national program, and I'm looking at a project proposed for EWP, Emergency Watershed Protection Program in Florida. And they have a project to do 1,200 feet of stream bank protection. And I was amazed at the amount of information I got from Geo Navigator and looking at aerial photos, but not only aerial photos, but the fact is that you can zoom down on street level, you can circle around, and I can see this. You can see the ditch really great on aerial stuff. I can look at where it's discharging, and then I have a chance to now argue with the engineers that said they're going to do this. And say, well, that doesn't make sense. I look at this stuff and see a lot more information. So, that is a really great tool to really find out stuff on a property, and the history too. Because I looked at one the other day. I was consulting with one of our engineers in the West, and they were looking at a project. They were talking about this farm. They sent me some pictures, and they didn't. I looked at the picture, looked at the aerial, and they didn't match up. Well, I finally found out that the farm had changed over, 5 years ago. They built a brand new barn. So then you can get the history of what on, and these things, all the historical stuff can kind of play into your planning process and say, how did the farmer move from here to there? Or did the operations, somebody bought it, resold it, the kid expanded now, those kind of things. So anyway, a lot of good tools out there to kind of give you some good background information to really help you out when you're going out to the field looking at stuff. So very good.
Thank you again, Pete. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yep. Folks, have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine here, and hate to say I'm going to take the afternoon off and go for a 25-mile bike ride, but you got to do something interesting when you're semi-retired. So have a great day.
All right. That was our last presentation for this morning. So thank you all for attending. We will see you next week, March 18th. We'll start at 8 o'clock again. And hope you all have a great day. So, Tim, I don't know if you're on or not, but we'll let everybody.
Yeah, I'm
Go ahead,
back.
Tim.
I'm back. And I was just going to say that I'll have another joke ready for next week, so you can look forward to that. And yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Have a great week. And we'll look forward to virtually seeing you next Tuesday.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.